Chapter 255. She never went to Qin Shi's immortal's cave again. Since he had already woken up, his injuries were already healed. She didn't need to do anything else. Lord Daoist Jinghe always wanted to sound her out about what happened that day, but she didn't say anything. Before long, Mo Tiange heard he was in closed-door meditation to attempt to form his nascent soul. Regarding this, she was very puzzled. Shouldn't he be resting for a few years after being seriously injured? Why was he in such a hurry to break through? Mo Tiange didn't ask this question, so she only heard Lord Daoist Jinghe vaguely mention it. It turned out that he had obtained all of her Yin's spiritual energy and comprehended a new cultivation technique. Perhaps it would be helpful for him to break through, so he was in a hurry to go into closed-door meditation. Mo Tiange couldn't help but feel a bit disappointed when she heard what he said. Soon after, she laughed at herself. Since she'd already gotten over it, why did she have to be like this? No matter what, love wasn't as important as the path to immortality. Just like how he was in a hurry to form his nascent soul, she should also be thinking about forming her gold core. Thus, after preparing for several days, she reported to her master and decided to go into secluded meditation. He set up restrictions and closed the immortal's cave. Mingxin residents no longer allowed anyone to enter or leave. He then entered the virtual sky world and began to meditate in closed-door meditation. Cultivation knew no time. Year after year. Spring, summer, autumn, and winter, light flashed by. Unknowingly, more than 10 years had passed. In these 10 years, many things had happened. For example, when Han Qingyu formed her gold core, martial uncle Xianyin, who oversaw Sweet Dew Peak, finally had his first core formation disciple and started to have the imposing manner of a nascent soul cultivator. For example, as Yi Jingguan guessed correctly, Bai Yanfei didn't marry junior martial sister Jiang in the end. Instead, he married senior martial sister Wu, whom he always disdained, who was martial uncle Miaoyi's last disciple. Another example would be martial uncle Ling Su passing away in meditation. First, junior martial sister Jiang was disappointed in love, and then she suffered such a blow. She shut herself in the drifting cloud peak all day and rarely saw people. Luo Fengshue's guess was also correct. For example, after martial uncle Lingshu passed away in meditation, none of the several Xianqing school disciples who were in closed-door meditation succeeded in forming their nascent souls, including Qin Shoujing. In the first year of Mo Tiange's closed-door meditation, after Qin Shi's injuries healed, he formally entered closed-door meditation to form his nascent soul. 2 years later, he finally failed. Another 4 years passed, and he once again went into seclusion to break through to the nascent soul realm, but he still didn't succeed. 16 years passed in a flash. Mo Tiange finally reached the peak stage of the foundation building realm and temporarily came out of her closed-door meditation. Reaching the peak stage of the foundation building realm at the age of 78 was still an inconceivable age. Even with Qin Shoujing's outstanding achievements, Clear Spring Peak's gloomy mood caused by Qin Shoujing's repeated failures to form his nascent soul also somewhat dissipated. In fact, if Mo Tiange hadn't deliberately suppressed her cultivation speed and suffered serious injuries several times, she should have formed her gold core by now. However, the path of cultivation was filled with thorns. Being heavily injured or even having one's cultivation regress was a path that cultivators had to take, so there was no need to dwell on it. Mo Tiange was sitting in Mingxin Residence's small reception hall, listening to Luo Fengshue's idle chatter with her. She lowered her head and remained silent for a long time. Luo Fengshue had already advanced into the middle stage of the foundation building realm. She'd never been good at cultivating, so among elite disciples, her cultivation level could only be considered average, but it wasn't bad either. Tiange, Tiange. Ha! Mo Tiange snapped out of her trance. Luo Fengshue complained, "What are you doing? Why are you absent-minded?" If you continue like this, I'll leave. Don't. Although Mo Tiange was absent-minded, she was seriously listening to the news Luo Fengxue was talking about. I'm just in a daze. If you leave, who can I talk to? I can't find anyone to talk to in the entire Clear Spring Peak. Oh. Luo Fengxue was surprised. Why isn't there anyone to talk to? Doesn't Grandmaster have a lot of maids? Besides, I remember you have a nephew. He'll talk to you, won't he? Mo Tiange sighed. I really don't get along with those maids. In the past, they liked to set me up, but after I beat them up, they were convinced and became afraid of me again. Jinji went out to gain experience. That brat's actually quite motivated, he knows he doesn't have enough experience. As for Master, he could have talked to him, but he's obviously in a bad mood these days, so I didn't provoke him. Grandmaster's in a bad mood. Luo Fengxue thought for a moment then asked, is it because Martial Uncle Shoujing failed to form his nascent soul? Probably. Mo Tiange lowered her head and answered faintly, I think Master's certainly disappointed. Although he always said senior martial brother Shoujing formed his gold core too early and should have done things more steadily, seeing him fail again and again, it'd be strange if he wasn't anxious. If I were him, I'd also be anxious, Luo Fengxue said with a frown. Alas! I'm so angry. Before Martial Uncle Shoujing formed his nascent soul, many people in the school said he'd definitely succeed. But now, everyone says soul formation isn't core formation, and whether Martial Uncle Shoujing is a genius or not can only be determined by his soul formation. Although Luo Fengxue moved to Sweet Dew Peak with Lord Daoist Xianin, Clear Spring Peak was the place she belonged to since she was a child, so she always felt unhappy when others talked about Clear Spring Peak. Mo Tiange, on the other hand, was calm. She smiled and said, if they want to say it, then say it. I think although Master must feel uncomfortable, he still doesn't care about those people. That's true. Luo Fengxue mumbled then said, in fact, I also find it strange that Martial Uncle Shoujing actually failed to form his nascent soul. Moreover, he failed twice in a row. If it hadn't happened, I wouldn't have believed it. Mo Tiange was stunned. She then asked with a smile, why? Isn't it normal to fail to form one's nascent soul? I remember that among the nascent soul lords in our school, only the head Grand Supreme Elder succeeded in his first attempt. The others all succeeded several times, right? Lord Daoist Miaoyi, who was also known as a genius, also tried to form her nascent soul 3 times before she advanced. That's true, but this is Martial Uncle Shoujing. Luo Fengxue emphasized. Because he's Martial Uncle Shoujing, everyone thinks he should succeed in his first attempt. How could that be? Mo Tiange shook her head. She thought to herself, in the end, it's because Qin Shoujing was deified that those rumors started, right? Presumably, with his double spiritual roots, he surpassed geniuses with single spiritual roots. He formed his gold core at 78 years old and reached the peak stage of the core formation realm at 175 years old. What a genius! Precisely because he was such a genius, everyone had high expectations of him. They felt that if he didn't form his nascent soul in his first attempt, he wouldn't be worthy of his extraordinary reputation as a genius. In reality, he was just an ordinary cultivator. Even though he cultivated diligently and possessed rare treasures, he would still encounter bottlenecks like other cultivators. His cultivation level didn't come out of thin air. You don't say. In fact, I heard some things from Grandmaster. The reason why Martial Uncle Shoujing failed to form his nascent soul was because there was a loophole in his mental state. Grandmaster was very worried about this. Loophole in his mental state. Mo Tiange's heart skipped a beat. She recalled that day 16 years ago. But in the next moment, she shook her head and laughed at herself. How could she have such great charm? It had nothing to do with her. It's nothing. She said slowly, many people simply don't realize the existence of a loophole in their mental state before they encounter it. Besides, senior martial brother Shojing hasn't even reached 200 years old yet, so what's there to be anxious about? I've never heard of anyone forming their nascent soul before 200 years old in the history of the celestial pole. That's true, but martial uncle Shojing seems to be very anxious this time. It's been 8 years since he last failed to form his nascent soul. During these 8 years, he tried every means possible to find a lot of treasures. I heard he's going to enter closed-door meditation again now. So fast. Mo Tiange was dumbfounded. Although it was normal for people to fail to form their nascent soul, it was unusual for him to enter closed-door meditation so frequently. As far as she knew, cultivators in the celestial pole who failed to form their nascent soul would only enter closed-door meditation again after more than 10 years. If the time was too short, not only would the loophole in their mental state not disappear, but it would also become more serious. The time it took Qin Shi to form his nascent soul 3 times was indeed a bit too short. This time, it took him 8 years, and the last time, it was even shorter, only 4 years. You also think martial uncle Shojing is too anxious, right? Luo Fengxue shook her head and sighed. I asked my master, but he also didn't understand what was going on. Grandmaster also didn't say anything and just let him do whatever he wanted. I found it strange. Could it be that Grandmaster isn't afraid of martial uncle Shojing having problems forming his nascent soul? Forming one's nascent soul wasn't the same as forming one's gold core. The risk of forming one's gold core was relatively low. As long as there was someone guarding the core formation process and they wouldn't be disturbed by others, generally speaking, there wouldn't be any danger. Even if they failed, they would just have to start all over again. But forming one's nascent soul was different. If one failed in forming one's nascent soul, it was very likely that they would be lost in their inner demon. There was also a possibility that when their gold core shattered, they wouldn't be able to successfully form their nascent soul and their cultivation level would dissipate just like that. In other words, if one failed in forming one's nascent soul, it was best to do it before one's gold core shattered. If one couldn't guide the spiritual aura contained in the shattered gold core back to their dantian after one's gold core shattered, their cultivation level might be crippled. Not only would they no longer have the opportunity to form their nascent soul, but they would also be inferior to core formation cultivators. Mo Tiange also frowned when she thought up to this point. Yes, this is too strange. After obtaining Mo Tiange's approval, Luo Fengxue said, in fact, it's not that Grandmaster isn't worried. Why doesn't he care? I'm afraid he can't care even if he wants to, Mo Tiange said. Master always said he's too opinionated, so he can't be persuaded. At this point, Mo Tiange was also puzzled. He wasn't an impulsive person, he always made plans before he acted. Why did he insist on doing this when everyone knew it wasn't feasible? Could it be that he had no other choice? After Luo Fengxue said something else, Mo Tiange once again became absent-minded. In the end, Luo Fengxue lost interest and wanted to leave. Mo Tiange apologized to Luo Fengxue and didn't ask her to stay. Her mind was indeed in a mess right now, so it wasn't the time to gossip. Mo Tiange had just reached the peak stage of the foundation building realm, so she planned to relax for several years before entering closed-door meditation to form her gold core. 3 years later, Qin Shi's third attempt to form his nascent soul still ended in failure. Fortunately, he didn't lose himself in his inner demon, nor did he lose his cultivation because of his gold core. However, this blow made him quiet down. Even when Mo Tiange entered closed-door meditation to form her gold core, she didn't hear any news about him. It was as if he never left his immortal's cave again. Everyone said Qin Shojing still had double spiritual roots. No matter how fast his cultivation level advanced before he formed his nascent soul, he wasn't a real genius. They completely forgot what they said before. Qin Shoujing, with his double spiritual roots, managed to form his gold core at the age of 78. That alone was enough for him to be called a genius. At the same time, Master Daoist Lingxi, Xianqing School's single spiritual root cultivator, reached the peak stage of the core formation realm and entered closed-door meditation to form his nascent soul. As a result, Li Lingxi, who had always been overshadowed by Qin Shoujing, started to be recognized as a genius. The title of genius of Xianqing School's new generation finally changed. However, Mo Tiange didn't have the chance to hear about any of this. After Qin Shi failed to form his nascent soul, she once again closed her immortal's cave and set restrictions. Even Lord Daoist Jinghe was blocked outside the door as he entered the virtual sky world to try to form his gold core. Chapter 256. During core formation, Mo Tiange entered the virtual sky world and deliberately left a stone sculpture puppet outside to disguise itself as her. When she cultivated, she could use formations to confuse Lord Daoist Jinghe's divine sense. In any case, he wouldn't care too much about it. But during core formation, Lord Daoist Jinghe's divine sense would definitely pay close attention to this place. For the sake of the virtual sky world secrets, it was better to make it more realistic. Fortunately, she obtained the Xuanji formation book, so the technique of formations was far from ordinary. The stone sculpture puppet itself had spiritual aura fluctuations of the late stage of the foundation building realm, so it wouldn't be a problem for her to disguise herself as her. However, after she formed her gold core and came out of the virtual sky world, she had to make some tricks to create the celestial phenomenon of core formation. Then, inside the virtual sky world, she put the medicinal pills she usually concocted and some treasures Lord Daoist Jinghe prepared for her to form her gold core in a proper place. First was the dustless pill. This pill wasn't the same as the foundation building pill used for foundation building. To be exact, it was a kind of medicinal pill to defend against inner demons. Because inner demons were the biggest threat during core formation, it was the most important medicinal pill for core formation. This had always been the case since ancient times. In ancient times, the only medicinal pill used to defend against inner demons was the dustless pill. Next was the extreme purity pill. This pill contained a large amount of spiritual aura and had a similar effect to the foundation building pill. After taking this pill, the body would instantly release a large amount of spiritual aura. With the help of this spiritual aura, the cultivator could begin to break through to the core formation realm. Finally, there was the immortal wind dew. This dew was a medicinal pill in the form of liquid. It was concocted from the liquid of 7 leaves purple heart lotus and jade heart grass, along with dozens of kinds of immortal roots and spiritual plants. It was a pill recipe found in the virtual sky world. Mo Tiange saw that this spiritual medicine was helpful for core formation, and the main ingredients were already available in the virtual sky world, so she paid attention to the outside world to find the missing ingredients. She had just concocted it a while ago. After doing all this, Mo Tiange began to meditate. She didn't think about anything and let her mind become as still as water. In fact, she had never been as confident as she was today. She was no longer the aura-refining disciple who possessed 5 spiritual roots despite possessing a pure constitution. She was no longer the same aura-refining disciple whose aptitude was akin to trash. She had extraordinary aptitude, a large number of spiritual herbs, an extraordinary formation, and a cultivation environment that was not inferior to the one in the distant past era. Why would she need to worry about making a realm breakthrough? He slowly adjusted his breathing and circulated his spiritual energy, immersing himself in the cycle of spiritual energy. Inside the Dantian, there was a small area that not only contained yin qi, but also yang qi. Unlike ordinary people, where yin and yang were mixed together, they fused with each other to form a cycle. When the cycle of yin and yang reached a balance, the five elements would take on both yin and yang forms, forming the state of primordial chaos. Although the yang spiritual energy in his body was very little, it was enough to occupy a corner deep in his dantian. Starting from this small chaotic element circulation, Mo Tiange guided the yin spiritual aura in her body and slowly breathed in and out. Inside the virtual sky world, countless pure spiritual aura surrounded her. Gradually, she entered a state of nothingness. In the primordial wilderness, at the beginning of the world, the gods appeared. In the ancient vast expanse, the gods had created man, and man had appeared. The gods left the world, immortals and demons separated, and the world changed. The desolation of ancient times, the rebirth of mankind, the war between the righteous and the demonic, millions of years of time flowed before her eyes. She experienced the wind and clouds from the distant past era. This was the unique aura of the distant past era in the virtual sky world. It was as if she was also a speck of dust from the distant past era, drifting for hundreds of thousands of years. Mo Tiange opened her eyes. She felt her mind was like dust, rising and falling with the wind. Although it was ups and downs, it didn't cause any waves. She took the extreme clear pill, the dew of immortality, and the dustless pill in succession. When she took the foundation building pill, it was different from the spiritual aura vortex that seemed to explode. The extreme clear pill was gentle. It slowly slid down her throat and into her stomach. A warmth like that of a warm sun spread out, gradually submerging her entire body. This reminded her of when she was young. Every winter, her mother would often sit outside the house with her and bask in the sun. It was lazy and warm, as if she was in her mother's embrace. Mo Tiange lost her consciousness at this moment, and the spiritual aura in her body began to contract naturally. At the same time, countless spiritual aura from the virtual sky world rushed towards her, rushing towards her body. Her eyes, ears, mouth, nose, and every pore on her skin opened to accept the spiritual aura and block the impurities. Only the purest yin spiritual aura was accepted. This process lasted for a long time, but Mo Tiange's consciousness had already melted in the aura of the distant past era. Even a year felt like a few days to her. Time passed day by day. One day, Mo Tiange suddenly felt an explosive pain in her body, from her dantian to her meridians to her 5 viscera and 6 bowels. She sobered up, but she couldn't do anything. She could only let the yin spiritual aura wreak havoc in her body. However, unlike spiritual aura going out of control, the yin spiritual aura filled her whole body, and her meridians and dantian completely contained it. It was just that the speed at which it increased was too fast, so it violently clashed with her meridians and dantian, which were trying to restrain it. This kind of conflict brought twisted pain. Mo Tiange gritted her teeth and endured it. She did her best to breathe according to Lord Daoist Jinghe's instructions, letting the spiritual aura in her body return to a regular pattern. She didn't know how much time had passed, but her body finally adapted to the pain caused by the spiritual aura expanding. She could finally control the small mass of spiritual aura of the origin inside her body. She placed this mass of spiritual aura at the entrance of her dantian and sea of knowledge to protect the most important place. After doing this, the meridians could no longer contain the spiritual aura, so it rushed towards her dantian. Mo Tiange firmly controlled the mass of spiritual aura of the origin, letting her dantian swallow the spiritual aura. When her dantian was full of spiritual aura, there was still a lot of spiritual aura rushing in from the outside. Therefore, this kind of pain became even more intense. She almost thought her dantian and meridians would be torn apart because they couldn't contain the spiritual aura anymore. But they didn't. When the spiritual aura couldn't contain it anymore, it began to be squeezed. They originally existed like liquid, but after being squeezed, they became even finer and there were almost no gaps between them. Mo Tiange knew the most critical moment had come. She closed her eyes. She had completely adapted to this kind of pain caused by the spiritual aura squeezing her dantian. But now, she still had to see whether the process of the spiritual aura squeezing could proceed smoothly. She breathed steadily, opened her meridians, and tightened her dantian. Sometimes, a container that was obviously full could always unexpectedly be stuffed with more things. Mo Tiange's dantian was like this right now. The spiritual aura was full, but it was still pouring in. The spiritual aura that was like liquid gradually became more and more viscous, almost glued together. Her dantian was expanding, and so were her meridians. Mo Tiange had completely adapted to this kind of squeezing pain. Her body felt like it was being torn apart. If the spiritual aura was a bit more violent, her body would explode and she wouldn't have any limbs left. However, the power of the extreme clear pill was gentle, so the spiritual aura was slowly being compressed. The dew of immortality was also playing its role. The warm immortal liquid nourished her meridians and dantian, helping them to expand and repairing the damage they received during the process of expansion and compression. At this time, the benefits of the five spirits' body cultivation in her meridians and dantian manifested. Mo Tiange wasn't like other people who had their meridians broken and failed at the last step due to a little carelessness. Her meridians were flexible. Although it was very painful to be squeezed, they still firmly wrapped around the spiritual aura. If there was any damage, the dew of immortality would repair it little by little. In front of such tough meridians, the spiritual aura could only retreat, so they squeezed each other and narrowed the distance between them. Finally, at the entrance of her sea of knowledge, where the massive aura of the origin was located, a small white granule appeared. It was only the size of a grain of rice, but it had an almost uncontrollable power. As soon as it appeared, all the spiritual aura madly rushed towards it, covering it bit by bit. The spiritual aura wrapped it layer by layer, almost turning it into a small ball of liquid. However, this wasn't enough. This grain of rice emitted a bright white light, and with an incomparably huge suction force, it swallowed all the spiritual aura. Although this grain of rice was very small, it was unknown how much spiritual aura it could contain. The spiritual aura in the form of liquid was squeezed in, but it only increased a little. Therefore, outside the virtual sky world, countless spiritual aura once again rushed in. Her meridians and dantian once again suffered incomparable pressure. This time, there wasn't only the squeezing force of the spiritual aura, but also the suction force of the white granule. No, this white granule had now become a small ball the size of a thumb. This small ball was still expanding, swallowing the spiritual aura and expanding itself. This process lasted for a long time, maybe several months, maybe several years, but Mo Tiange firmly controlled herself and didn't collapse from the pain. As time passed, the speed at which this small ball absorbed spiritual aura became slower and slower. In the beginning, it was crazy, but in the end, it stabilized. As if it had eaten its fill, its originally faint white color turned into a bright light. Now, it was already the size of a child's fist, emitting a bright and clean light. The process of absorbing spiritual aura stopped. The massive aura of the origin, which had always been around this small ball, entangled it and firmly wrapped it. Therefore, it turned into a light golden color. The gold core was formed. But this wasn't the end of core formation. The real test was coming. The moment the gold core was formed, Mo Tiange's consciousness was lost in the endless sea of knowledge. Outside the virtual sky world, in the main hall of Shangqing Palace on Clear Spring Peak, two people sat silently. Autumn passed and winter came. All the flowers were withered, but there was still the fragrance of white plums. The maids of Shangqing Palace cut several wintersweet branches and placed them in the hall, filling the hall with their delicate fragrance. It's been 3 years. Lord Daoist Jinghe murmured. His divine comprehension penetrated the pavilions and reached a certain place in the mountain, but he didn't feel anything abnormal except for the spiritual aura fluctuations of foundation-building cultivators. A winter-sweet branch floated down. She reached out and caught it. The petals immediately fell from his fingers. She spent more than 2 years building her foundation, so it shouldn't be a problem for her to take several years to form her gold core. Lord Daoish Jinghe's gaze shifted, but he still smiled. You're very confident about her. Are you sure she'll succeed in forming her gold core? Maybe she'll be trapped by her inner demon. No. Shi's gaze was calm, and his face was expressionless. She won't be trapped by her inner demon, she definitely won't. In fact, she wasn't like him. His cultivation life was too smooth, so once he faced difficulties, he couldn't get up again. She, on the other hand, went through hardships and walked on dangerous paths. Once she faced difficulties, she resolutely gave up. Chapter 257. Mo Tiange didn't know whether she was dreaming or not. But her fingers were warm, and the air was fragrant. Auntie. She turned around and saw Jinji running towards her. He still had a small and immature appearance. She felt something was wrong, but Jinji had already thrown himself in front of her and hugged her arm with a smile. This soft feeling was real. Auntie, where did you go? I'm already in the 5th layer of the aura refining realm. The little Jinji showed off. She smiled. I went to cultivate. That seemed to be the case, right? She still remembered the feeling of spiritual aura filling her body and breathing in and out. Jinji pulled her and said with a smile, Auntie, don't you find it annoying that you're always cultivating? Grandmaster said you have to strike a balance between work and rest when doing things. It's not good to cultivate all the time. Come and play with me. This. She said, Grandmaster has Grandmaster's cultivation method, but it's not suitable for everyone. Auntie is only interested in cultivating, and cultivating is the happiest thing for Auntie. But. The little Jinji lowered his head. She smiled and took Xiaohua out of the spiritual beast bag. Here, Xiaohua will play with you, okay? Go and find Hualing. Don't you play together? All right. Jinji disappeared in the blink of an eye as if he disappeared into thin air, but she didn't feel anything was wrong. She also didn't go back to cultivate. Instead, she wandered aimlessly in the bright spring sunshine, treading on the morning dew of clear spring peak. She felt as if she had nothing to do, but she also seemed to be waiting for something. The wind blew, and the air was filled with the fragrance of unknown flowers and plants. Someone came walking on the grass with light footsteps and a leisurely manner. Why didn't you call me when you came? He said with a smile. She also smiled and turned her head to look at the tall and straight man with a calm demeanor. His eyebrows were deep as if they were drawn by ink, and the contours of his face were sharp as if they were carved by a knife. However, his facial features were clear and moist, making people fall into them at first glance. He said with a smile, You formed your gold core. She nodded. I've formed my gold core. Without saying anything else, the two of them took each other's arms and walked slowly on the grass. They walked past the bright spring wind, the luxuriant summer wind, the gorgeous autumn light, and the silent winter wind, year after year. Hundreds of years passed hand in hand. They counted the years that passed in the blink of an eye. In the blink of an eye, they had reached the nascent soul and soul formation stage, standing at the peak of the world. He laughed and said, How about this for the rest of my life? A lifetime. After reaching the soul formation stage, you will have a lifespan of at least 10,000 years. Do you really want to live like this for the rest of your life? I'm willing. If we can ascend, then we'll still be together. If we can't, then so be it. Mo Tiange opened her eyes and stared at the empty virtual sky world. She was alone. The absorption of spiritual energy had already stopped, and his body was quiet. After going through the 10,000 laws of nature formation, she was no longer entangled in the shadows of her childhood, but the secrets in her heart were brought out. Fortunately, she managed to break free in the end. Dreams were beautiful, but reality wasn't that bad. Eternity was just a myth. When the seas dried up and the rocks crumbled, even mortal girls would not believe it. Only the heavenly Tao was eternal. It cycled over and over, growing and multiplying endlessly. Standing up, Zhang Xian flung his sleeves, and a surge of spiritual energy swirled around his sleeves. She was already a core formation cultivator. With a faint smile, she threw the inner demons she once indulged into the past and came out of the virtual sky world. Just as she was about to make some tricks to create a celestial phenomenon similar to core formation to fool her, she heard a sudden clap of thunder in the sky. The sound of wind and thunder rumbled, clouds gathered, and spiritual light flashed. Qin Shi stood up abruptly and spread his divine sense. With a happy and helpless expression, he muttered, "She succeeded in forming her gold core. It was different from when she built her foundation." At that time, spiritual aura gathered, auspicious clouds loomed, and immortal aura lingered. Today, however, when she formed her gold core, the wind and clouds were boundless, and the thunder was like a celebration. None of them knew that the combination of the spiritual roots of the origin from the distant past era, the art of the origin from the distant past era, as well as the cultivation environment from the distant past era, these were the conditions for Mo Tiange to form her gold core, resulted in such a strong celestial phenomenon. For a moment, the entire 7 peaks of Mount Taikang were shrouded in wind and clouds. Countless spiritual aura rushed towards Shangqing Palace on Clear Spring Peak. The weaker aura refining disciples couldn't bear it. Their minds were shaken, and it was difficult for them to breathe. "Is this core formation or soul formation?" someone shouted. One after another, the high-level cultivators of the 6 peaks walked out of their immortals' caves and gazed in the direction of Clear Spring Peak, lost in their thoughts. Among them, Lord Daoist Jinyang gazed at the wind and clouds above Clear Spring Peak and heaved a sigh. Core formation, someone's formed her gold core. Bai Yanfei, who followed beside him, was startled. He asked, "Master, why would core formation produce such a strong celestial phenomenon?" Lord Daoist Jinyang stroked his beard and smiled. "Your martial uncle Jinghe's luck is really good. The disciple he casually accepted is unexpectedly so talented. Presumably, in the future, Clear Spring Peak will have at least 2 more nascent soul cultivators." Bai Yanfei raised his head and looked towards Clear Spring Peak. His gaze was filled with disappointment and envy. Clear Spring Peak again. Could it be that senior martial sister Mo? As he thought about this, he felt even more upset. He originally thought he was the most outstanding disciple of this generation because he had a single spiritual root, but it turned out there had always been someone standing in front of him. He remembered that year on that deserted mountaintop in Clear Spring Peak, the woman who pointed at him, a proud son of heaven, and spoke coldly to him. He was in his 20s, so he was still too young, so he only felt angry and ashamed. However, the passage of time only verified her words one by one. Back then, when he was building his foundation, she was already in the middle stage of the foundation building realm. When he was in the late stage of the foundation building realm, she was already in the core formation realm. Even if he, Bai Yanfei, was extremely talented, he wasn't a real genius in the end. Master said Clear Spring Peak would have 2 more nascent soul cultivators, and one of them should be that Qin Shoujing. Soul formation was never a matter that could be accomplished overnight. He wouldn't be like those short-sighted disciples who thought he was ruined. He was only 200 years old, so he still had a long time to try to form his nascent soul. As for the other one, it was probably this senior martial sister Mo. Later on, he found out that this senior martial sister Mo's talent was even more outstanding than his. What he said that year was all a joke. Mo Tiange walked out of the hut. Her whole body was surrounded by spiritual aura, shining like a rainbow. A small magpie formed from spiritual aura fluttered around her. She smiled and stretched out her finger to touch it lightly. The spiritual magpie scattered and once again turned into spiritual light. She raised her head and saw that the entire Mingxin residence was filled with this kind of extremely beautiful spiritual aura. Through the broken stone wall that let in the sunlight, she could see the same kind of spiritual light that filled the sky, fluttering high in the sky. Half a day later, the sound of wind, thunder, and clouds finally calmed down. The auspicious clouds dispersed, and the spiritual light also quieted down. The disciples of Clear Spring Peak and even all the disciples of Xianqing School learned of one thing. Lord Daoist Jinghe's last disciple, martial uncle Mo, formed her gold core and from then on, entered the ranks of core formation cultivators. Mo Tiange hadn't even left Mingxin residence, but she already received countless summoning talismans congratulating her. There were friends she was familiar with, such as Yi Jingwen, Luo Fengxue, Han Qingyu, Kuang Zhu, Zhan Bai, and so on. There were also core formation senior martial brothers and sisters she'd never met before. When she was in the foundation building realm, although she was Lord Daoist Jinghe's disciple and only needed to call fellow core formation cultivators senior martial brother or senior martial sister, when she met them, there was still a gap in their realms, so those people only treated her with a bit of courtesy but didn't interact with her. It wasn't until today, when she officially became a core formation cultivator, that these core formation senior martial brothers and sisters finally took out the enthusiasm of a peer and sent congratulatory letters. Mo Tiange read them one by one and sent the same summoning talismans expressing her gratitude. She then walked out of Mingxin residence and entered the main hall. Lord Daoist Jinghe rarely sat upright on the dragon throne and looked at her with a smile. Although he wasn't the one who taught this disciple, he always had a laissez-faire attitude and let her develop as she pleased. Nevertheless, step by step, he guided her in the right direction. Mo Tiange knelt down and kowtowed sincerely. Disciple thanks Master for your 60 years of teaching. Lord Daoist Jinghe accepted her kowtow and gently waved his sleeve, lifting her up. The path of cultivation is rugged and bumpy. You have to experience everything on your own. Master can only guide you this much, you still have to work hard in the future. Yes, disciple will keep it in mind. One after another, Xianqing School disciples learned that the last disciple of Lord Daoist Jinghe of Clear Spring Peak, who was only 84 years old, successfully formed her gold core and entered the ranks of core formation cultivators. After more than 100 years, after Master Daoist Shoujing and Master Daoist Lingxi, Xianqing School once again produced a genius cultivator who formed her gold core within 100 years. For a while, even the news of Master Daoist Lingxi entering closed-door meditation to form his nascent soul was no longer attractive. Because Master Daoist Lingxi also failed to form his nascent soul in the end and had just come out of closed-door meditation. As a result, in just 3 years, the title of the most outstanding genius disciple of Xianqing School's new generation once again changed hands. After Mo Tiange learned about this, she didn't know whether she should shed tears of sympathy for this unfortunate Master Daoist Lingxi or not. In the 100 years when he was supposed to be the most glorious, Qin Shoujing, who was the same age as him, had always been above him. When Qin Shoujing was pulled down from the pedestal, he finally obtained the title of genius, but then she appeared out of nowhere. As for this so-called genius title, Mo Tiange just laughed it off. In the celestial pole, Xianqing School was famous for producing genius cultivators. Lord Daoist Jinyang 1,000 years ago, Lord Daoist Miaoyi several hundred years later, Master Daoist Shoujing and Master Daoist Lingxi more than 100 years ago, and now it was the youngest Imo Tiange and Bai Yanfei. Now, both Qin Shoujing and Li Lingxi encountered setbacks in their soul formation. Bai Yanfei was 82 years old, but he was still in the late stage of the foundation building realm. Presumably, it would take him more than 100 years to form his gold core. Imo Tiange was the only one who successfully formed her gold core at the age of 84. She was only slightly slower than Qin Shoujing, but she was much faster than Li Lingxi. But so what? Although there were very few high-level cultivators in the celestial pole, there were more than 100 nascent soul cultivators. If they couldn't form their nascent soul, they couldn't be called real geniuses. This was the case for Qin Shoujing, Li Lingxi, Imo Tiange, and Bai Yanfei. This was the world of cultivation. Even if it was just a title, it was still very realistic. Tiange, every disciple who forms their gold core must be given a Taoist name. Since you've successfully formed your gold core, we'll choose a day to hold your core formation ceremony to celebrate your success. Master. Imo Tiange was a bit hesitant. I don't want to be so ostentatious. Lord Taoist Jinghe smiled. It doesn't have to be ostentatious. Any disciple who forms their gold core must do this. At that time, there will be more than one Lord Taoist as your witness. Those who have a master will be given a Taoist name by their master. Those who don't have a master will be given a Taoist name by the head Grand Supreme Elder. You don't need to refuse. Every disciple has to go through this step. Yes. Since he said that, Imo Tiange could only agree. In addition, since you've formed your gold core, Master should give you a separate Immortal's Cave. It just so happens that after your martial uncle Xianyin forms his nascent soul, no one will take over his Immortal's Cave. From now on, that Immortal's Cave will be given to you. Imo Tiange was pleasantly surprised. Thank you, Master. She knew about Lord Taoist Xuanin's former Immortal's Cave. The main Immortal's Cave was enormous, and there were many small Immortal's Caves surrounding it for disciples to live in. Although the spiritual aura there was slightly inferior to that in Shangqing Palace, its scale was still rare even among core formation cultivators' Immortal's Caves. Lord Taoist Jinghe smiled. Alright, you've just formed your gold core, so you should go and stabilize your realm first. There are still many things that I'll tell you later. Yes, Master. Chapter 258. The date of the core formation ceremony was soon set. Qin Shoujing and Li Lingxi both failed to form their nascent souls, so the enthusiasm of Xianqing school disciples for cultivating was severely damaged. Imo Tiange just happened to form her gold core at this time, so it was a good time to boost the disciples' morale. Imo Tiange, who originally planned to keep a low profile, finally found that her core formation ceremony was grander than she had imagined. Of course, the core formation ceremony couldn't be compared to the nascent soul ceremony. Not only were cultivators from other cultivation groups not invited, but only cultivators in the foundation building realm and above were invited to the ceremony. As for aura refining disciples, they could come, but there was no requirement if they didn't come. However, this kind of ceremony usually only had one or two nascent soul cultivators and half of the core formation cultivators at most. This time, however, all 5 nascent soul cultivators except for Lord Taoist Huayan who was in closed-door meditation showed up. More than 40 core formation cultivators, except for those who were traveling or in closed-door meditation, also showed up, so it naturally looked grand. The core formation ceremony had always been held by cultivators from one of the 6 peaks, so Imo Tiange's ceremony was naturally held on Clear Spring Peak. For this reason, the Steward's Hall of Clear Spring Peak chose the largest Ningxin Hall and decorated it with lanterns and streamers to make it grand. On that day, snowflakes drifted down from Clear Spring Peak in winter, filling the sky with flying snow as if it was another form of celebration. Imo Tiange had long changed into the new Taoist robe sent by the Steward's Hall. She wore a white robe, a light blue buttoned robe, and a blue and white robe with innate trigrams and taiji cloud patterns on the collar and sleeves. She also wore a hibiscus crown. She didn't need any extra decorations, she already looked like an immortal, dignified, and elegant. For some reason, after she formed her gold core, although her appearance was no different from before, she was obviously more elegant and beautiful than when she was in the aura refining or foundation building realm. When she asked, Lord Daoist Jinghe answered, "You cultivate the Sunu art of the origin, which partly comes from the art of Sunu. Doesn't the art of Sunu keep a woman young and beautify her appearance? I think it's because of this technique." Since she had formed her gold core, she didn't care about this. In any case, no matter how her appearance changed, it would be difficult for cultivators to think she was devastatingly beautiful. At most, they would praise her. By the time Mo Tiange arrived at Ningxin Hall, several hundred cultivators in the foundation building realm and above had already gathered inside the hall. Outside the hall, there were also countless aura-refining disciples braving the wind and snow to come and watch. With a smile on her face, she walked into Tranquil Heart Palace. The four nascent Soul Dao lords stood at the very front, while Sect Master Shen led dozens of core formation elders to their sides. Behind these elders were many foundation establishment disciples. The nascent Soul Dao lords were all delighted. For the sake of the nascent Soul Dao lords, the elders revealed smiles on their faces even though they did not think much about it. As for the foundation establishment cultivators behind them, they were both envious and jealous. Not long ago, Mo Tiange was just a foundation building cultivator like them. Now, however, she reached the sky in a single bound and became a high-level cultivator. This was only a core formation celebration, so there was no need for Lord Daoist Jinyang to personally preside over it. Sect Head Shen would be the one to do it. Upon seeing Mo Tiange coming in, School Head Shen led her to the front of the three Pure Ones patriarchs in the hall. He hinted for her to kneel, kowtow, and offer incense. Then he said loudly, Mo Tiange, a disciple of Xianqing School's Clear Spring Peak, has formed her gold core today and advanced into the core formation realm. According to Xianqing School's rules, she is now conferred the position of an elder. Sect Head Shen was also a core formation cultivator, so Mo Tiange didn't need to kneel to him. She only performed a Dao salute to show her respect. Then she took the identity tablet of an elder with both hands, as well as the first offering after she formed her gold core. After she accepted the identity tablet of an elder, Sect Head Shen smiled and said, Junior Martial Sister Mo, from now on, you're an elder of Xianqing School. When there's nothing to do, you can enjoy the sect's offerings every year. When there's something to do, I hope you can protect Xianqing School's interests and reputation. Yes, I'll obey Senior Martial Brother Sect Head's order. Sect Head Shen continued, since you've advanced into the core formation realm, according to Xianqing School's rules, please grant me a Daoist name. Right after he finished speaking, someone immediately placed a praying mat in front of Lord Daoist Jinghe. Mo Tiange took a few steps forward and knelt on the praying mat. Lord Daoist Jinghe said with a solemn expression, My disciple, Tiange, you're extremely talented and intelligent. You also have a firm Dao heart and great wisdom. Now that you've formed your gold core, you mustn't be arrogant and complacent. You must know that you haven't reached the great Dao yet. In the future, you must still work hard and mustn't slack off. Whenever a disciple made a realm breakthrough, they'd always be praised, but very few people would say the words, extremely talented. Lord Daoist Jinghe relied entirely on her spiritual roots of the origin, which were only seen once every several thousand years, so he used the words, extremely talented. Presumably, there really weren't any cultivators in the world who were more talented than her. Of course, those deification cultivators who'd been born a long time ago didn't count. Disciple will sincerely follow Master's instructions. Lord Daoist Jinghe revealed a faint smile. He stroked his short beard with his right hand and muttered, "The path to the great Tao is filled with untold hardships. The divine path is indistinct, and the immortal path is boundless. You seek the immortal path, and your state of mind can only be described as tranquility. You should also seek the subtlety of the Tao. You mustn't act rashly, and you should keep a calm heart. Therefore, Master bestows upon you the Taoist name Qingwei." Mo Tiange's gaze flickered, but her face remained expressionless. She lightly kowtowed. "Qingwei thanks Master for bestowing the name." Lord Taoist Jinghe nodded with a smile. Upon seeing this, school head Shen took over. "I've already kowtowed to thank Master for his kindness. Junior Martial Sister Qingwei, please rise." Mo Tiange once again saluted him, then stood up. She was led to the center by School Head Shin, and School Head Shin announced loudly, "Disciples, I hereby announce that Clear Spring Peak disciple Mo Tiange has been bestowed a name by her master, Lord Taoist Jinghe. From now on, her name is Master Taoist Qingwei." Once School Head Shin finished speaking, the core formation cultivators standing on both sides congratulated her. "Congratulations to Junior Martial Sister Qingwei for advancing to the core formation realm." Then, all the foundation building disciples saluted her one after another. "Disciple congratulates Martial Uncle Qingwei." Outside the hall, the voices of the aura refining disciples came from afar. "Disciple congratulates Master Taoist Qingwei." Even though her mood was calm, Mo Tiange still felt a bit excited when she heard the loud and powerful congratulations. After holding the core formation ceremony and being bestowed a Taoist name by her master, she was now an elder of Xianqing school. Mo Tiange's eyes became slightly moist. She took her first step towards becoming a high-level cultivator, and she couldn't help but think of some people she lost in her 80-plus years of life. Her mother who raised her alone, her father whom she never met, her second uncle who sacrificed his life for her, and Tianqiao who was implicated by her. If they knew about this, they would definitely be very happy, right? She was now a core formation cultivator and an elder of Xianqing School, one of the best cultivation groups in the Celestial Pole. She no longer needed to hide from place to place and didn't need to tremble in fear. She could walk under the sun with her head held high. The core formation ceremony ended. In the wind and snow, the aura refining and foundation building disciples left one after another. The nascent soul cultivators also returned to their immortals' caves, leaving only the core formation cultivators to make friends with the new junior martial sister Qingwei. In the past, although this junior martial sister was Lord Taoist Jinghe's disciple, she was still a foundation-building cultivator after all, so they didn't need to interact much. But things were different now. This junior martial sister successfully advanced to the core formation realm at such a young age. It was said that her talent was rarely seen in 1,000 years, and she also had a protective master like Lord Taoist Jinghe. Presumably, her future was bright, so it wouldn't be wrong to interact more with her. Mo Tiange was trapped in the crowd and couldn't get away, so she could only cheer up and socialize with these senior martial brothers and sisters from the same sect. Who said cultivators should be detached from worldly affairs? They left the secular world, but they were still entangled with worldly affairs. On a mountaintop on Clear Spring Peak, a man stood in the wind and snow with his hands behind his back. He was silently gazing in the direction of Ningxin Hole. The flying snow fell on his black hair and seeped into his blue clothes and white robe, but he didn't move at all. Lord Taoist Jinghe landed behind him and walked towards him while stepping on the ground full of broken jade. "Why didn't you go to the core formation ceremony?" A snowflake fell and covered his eyelashes, but it soon melted, leaving him with a bone-chilling coldness. He moved his gaze and said in a hoarse voice, "What if I went?" "Nothing." Lord Taoist Jinghe was in a very good mood. Ignoring Qin Shi's gloomy mood, he walked to Qin Shi's side and smiled. "Won't you also go when other people form their gold cores?" She didn't answer. He wasn't stupid. This master obviously came to tease him, so why should he answer and deliver himself to his master's doorstep? The two of them stood in the wind and snow for a while in silence. After a while, Shi suddenly said, "The path to the great Tao is filled with untold hardships. The divine path is indistinct, and the immortal path is boundless. It's subtle, mysterious, and unfathomable. You seek the immortal path, and your state of mind can only be described as tranquility. You should also seek the subtle Tao. You mustn't act rashly, and you should maintain tranquility with a calm heart. Therefore, Master bestowed upon you the Taoist name of Shoujing." Master, when you bestowed a Taoist name to your disciple, did you specifically choose to say these words? Lord Taoist Jinghe laughed hollowly. When you were young, didn't you participate in your senior martial brother Qingyuan's core formation ceremony? That was a long time ago. He only vaguely remembered that his master didn't say these words at that time. Sure enough, even during a solemn core formation ceremony, this dirty old man couldn't help but play around. But what was the use of doing this? He was just like a child. What wasn't his would never be his. Shi shook his head. From now on, there's only Mo Qingwei, not Mo Tiange. His voice was flat, but it carried an indescribable sadness. Lord Taoist Jinghe couldn't help but cast a sidelong glance at him. Brat. I'm really old, I don't understand anymore. Didn't I teach you that if you want something, you should look for it, take it, or even rob it? As the saying goes, cultivating is fine as long as you don't go against your heart. Who told you to be so dilly-dallying and pestering? Since Tiange has formed her gold core, the distance between the two of you is already very close. Why do you still feel even more despair? She chuckled. In the wind and snow, his laughter carried a chilliness that could freeze one's heart. Master, why did she form her gold core? Because her heart doesn't care about anything, and she doesn't even want anything. Lord Taoist Jinghe was stunned, but he seemed to understand a little. You mean, she doesn't care about you? What other explanation is there? He was disheartened and lowered his head. I'm trapped by my inner demon. I tried to form my nascent soul 3 times, but I couldn't make any progress. She, on the other hand, was unmoved and smoothly formed her gold core. You and I both know how difficult it is for cultivators who form their gold core for the first time and have never experienced inner demon, but she easily passed this hurdle. Lord Taoist Jinghe was speechless. For cultivators who formed their gold core for the first time and encountered inner demon for the first time, having a connection in their heart would be magnified infinitely. They would be intoxicated by it and wouldn't know how to get out. But Tiange. She couldn't have reached the realm of supreme indifference, could she? Master, what should I do? If this goes on, I won't be able to form my nascent soul in 10 or 100 years even if my lifespan ends. Lord Taoist Jinghe felt he couldn't answer this question. This was the first time this child asked him what to do in such a confused tone. In the past 100 years, he never needed other people's help. He walked on the path of seeking immortality and seeking Tao alone. He suddenly felt that meeting Tiange was really a disaster for him. Chapter 259. With a new immortal's cave, Mo Tiange moved again. Fortunately, she didn't have many things. The important things were either in her Qinkuan bag or in the virtual sky world. She simply packed up her usual belongings and moved to Lord Taoist Xuaning's original immortal's cave without moving the tables and chairs. When she first came to Clear Spring Peak, she lived in the small immortal's cave next to Lord Taoist Xuaning's. That was the first decent immortal's cave she lived in. Now, she returned to her hometown as the master of the main immortal's cave. Lord Taoist Xuaning moved to Sweet Dew Peak a long time ago, and all his disciples also moved away. Such a large immortal's cave now belonged to her alone. Although she knew Xianqing School, as a big cultivation group in the Celestial Pole, treated high-level cultivators very generously, giving her an immortal's cave of this size to a cultivator who'd just formed her gold core. Mo Tiange knew this was because Lord Daoist Jinghe loved her so much. Thinking up to this point, she smiled. How fortunate was her life. Although she lost a lot of things, she also obtained a lot of equally precious things. After advancing to the core formation realm, because she didn't have any disciples for the time being, the Steward's Hall asked her and sent several foundation building disciples to tidy up her immortal's cave. If she didn't mind, she could stay and continue to handle chores. In Xianqing School, if a foundation building cultivator wasn't an elite disciple, the disciples' rations were far from enough for their cultivation, so they usually sought some errands. Even for elite disciples, if their master status wasn't high and they didn't receive many rewards, the disciples' rations wouldn't be enough for their cultivation. When Mo Tiange first entered Xianqing School, she was brought back by Lord Daoist Jinghe's beloved disciple, Master Daoist Shoujing. She was also accepted as his registered disciple and was taught by Master Daoist Xianyin, so she never had to worry about spirit stones. But ordinary elite disciples weren't so lucky. Luo Fengxue had errands in the Steward's Hall and was favored by her master, so she had a lot of spirit stones. Yi Jingguan would occasionally take errands to earn some spirit stones for his cultivation. This was also the case when he was ordered to go to the secular world to bring her back to Xianqing School. For foundation building disciples, the best job was to enter the Steward's Hall and become a steward. Not only did they have a bit of authority, but they also had a stable income of spirit stones. However, the downside was that they couldn't go into closed-door cultivation for long periods of time, which would affect their cultivation. The only thing they lacked was handling some chores for the school. There were some things that the aura-refining disciples didn't feel at ease handing over to them if their cultivation levels were low, so they, the foundation-building disciples, would have to handle them. If they wanted to enter closed-door meditation, they only needed to ask for a leave of absence or entrust it to someone else. The downside was that there wouldn't be too many spirit stones and it wasn't stable. There was another job that was both good and bad, and that was to help core formation cultivators. To say that it was good was even better than the first method. He could meet a core formation cultivator, and if he did well, he might even be rewarded. How could a core formation cultivator be so easy to serve? If they encountered one or two with a bad temper, not only would they torment them, but they would also deduct their spirit stones. Moreover, generally speaking, core formation cultivators all had disciples under them. They would let their disciples do all the good work, leaving them with only some menial tasks. However, for a core formation cultivator like Mo Tiange who had just formed her gold core, didn't have any disciples, had an extraordinary identity, and had Lord Daoist Jinghe as her backer, working for her was a very good job. She had just formed her gold core and didn't have any disciples, so she wouldn't be too picky. They also had good jobs. With a backer, they were confident and generous when it came to rewards. However, just like Martial Uncle Shoujing in the past, the current Martial Uncle Qingwei's Immortal's Cave wasn't that easy to enter. One had to have some connections in the Steward's Hall to be recommended. Mo Tiange looked at the cultivators recommended by the Steward's Hall. Sure enough, most of them were disciples of her senior martial brothers and sisters, and a small portion also had some connections, which gave her a bit of a headache. She thought about it. Back then, senior martial brother Shoujing didn't seem to like other people entering his Immortal's Cave, so when he needed disciples to handle chores, he just picked a few from his senior martial brothers and sisters' disciples. However, she didn't have that kind of obsession with cleanliness. Although she also didn't like noise, her Immortal's Cave was very big, so it wouldn't be good if there was no one to manage it. It was just that it was really hard for her to handle so many people. She didn't know who had connections and whether it would matter if she refused them. Therefore, Mo Tiange sent a summoning talisman to ask Luo Fengxue. Luo Fengxue had seen this kind of thing a lot, so she should be able to give her some good advice. Before long, Luo Fengxue replied, "If you don't like it, just refuse. You don't have to worry about offending others. You're Grandmaster's official disciple now and you've advanced to the core formation realm, so the martial uncles won't blame you for this. If you're too lazy to deal with it, just list out the chores and hand them over to the steward's hall. The steward's hall will take good care of them for you." Mo Tiange suddenly saw the light. Right. Now that she formed her gold core, she wasn't only Lord Daoist Jinghe's disciple, but she was also an elder at Xianqing school. Why should she be afraid of offending others? Those senior martial brothers and sisters definitely wouldn't blame her for a few little disciples, and the steward's hall should also try to please her. If she told them something, they definitely wouldn't dare to neglect it. With a plan in mind, Mo Tiange listed out the chores she needed to deal with and handed them to the steward's hall steward. She told him which ones needed foundation building disciples and which ones didn't need to be restricted by their cultivation levels. As for the selection of people and the cost of spirit stones, she left them all to the steward. She also told him that she didn't like being disturbed by others and that there should be as few people as possible. The steward accepted her orders and left. Sure enough, he handled everything properly. Mo Tiange was delighted and rewarded him with a lot of things. Coincidentally, she entered the 10,000 laws of nature formation before she formed her gold core and obtained a lot of spiritual plants. When she was in a coma, those spiritual plants were handed over by Yi Zhenji. She was lucky, so the rewards for those spiritual plants were very generous. Later, when she woke up, she wanted to just leave them to Zhenji, but Zhenji firmly refused. He said he already had a share for his master's disciple and that his aunt was only in the foundation building realm, so she shouldn't take so many things from him. Mo Tiange gave it some thought and gave up. These spiritual plants had always been kept in her Qianquan bag, so she could use them to reward these disciples. Seeing that she was really generous, these disciples who came to do chores became even more diligent. As she thought about Yi Zhenji, Mo Tiange sat in her new immortal's cave in a daze for a while. When she and Qin Shi were both in closed-door meditation, Yi Zhenji went down the mountain by himself. He said his cultivation level had already reached the peak of the early stage of the foundation building realm, but his mental state wasn't experienced enough, so he should go out and gain experience. In the end, he still had a master now, and Qin Shi didn't object, so Mo Tiange didn't say anything and let him go. Besides, Zhenji really didn't have enough experience, so it wouldn't be good to keep him by her side all the time. She thought about it. Although her cultivation path could be considered smooth since she came to Xianqing school, how many things had she experienced in her childhood? She had long cultivated her firm and courageous character. Zhenji, however, wasn't like that. His cultivation path was too smooth, so he practically didn't have any mental state experience. If he didn't go out and gain experience, he wouldn't be able to grow. Later on, during her 16-year closed-door meditation, Zhenji came back once. At that time, she was still in closed-door meditation, and Qin Shi was also in closed-door meditation. Zhenji stayed for 2 years before he left the mountain again. This time, he still hadn't come back. After careful calculation, he hadn't come back for 8 years. Mo Tiange couldn't help but feel a bit worried. There hadn't been any news from Zhenji for 8 years. Did something happen to him? He did leave his blood essence and kept it with Qin Shi, but Qin Shi didn't say anything, so presumably, he was fine. But where did Zhenji go in the end? He clearly knew she was going to form her gold core soon, but he unexpectedly didn't come back for 8 years. This was too unusual. With this thought in mind, Mo Tiange sent a summoning talisman to the steward's hall, asking them to find Yi Zhenji's whereabouts. Maybe this child was trapped somewhere and needed help. Aside from the Immortals' Cave and Jinji, there was another matter that gave Mo Tiange a headache. She advanced to the core formation realm at the age of 84, which once again caused a sensation in West Kanwu. Many cultivators from other cultivation groups came to congratulate her. If she refused to meet them, she'd be putting on airs. But if she met them, she really couldn't stand these social interactions. In the end, it was Luo Fengxue who gave her a suggestion. Martial Uncle Shoujing was also like this when he formed his gold core. He used stabilizing his realm as an excuse to enter closed-door meditation and let the steward's disciples handle it. No one can say anything about this reason, so you might as well do it. Mo Tiange suddenly understood. Yes, after a cultivator advanced, the most important thing was to stabilize their realm. If she said that, other people couldn't blame her. After she told the steward's disciples what Luo Fengxue said, Mo Tiange obediently stayed in her room. This was to avoid these troubles and also because she really needed to stabilize her realm. After advancing to the core formation realm, Mo Tiange could now openly take out 2 foundation building puppets. With her identity as a core formation cultivator and with Lord Daoist Jinghe as her backer, having 2 foundation building puppets would only surprise people a little. In addition to stabilizing her realm, there was another very important matter. It was time for her to refine her natal magic weapon. She had already given the refining formula for the Heaven and Earth fan to Lord Daoist Jinghe for evaluation. Lord Daoist Jinghe was full of praise for this magic weapon formula. When he learned it was created by a female cultivator several thousand years ago, he was even more fascinated. Thinking back to that era, he wished he could go back and have a chat with Primordial Lady Bisui. Mo Tiange didn't mention that Primordial Lady Bisui was her ancestor, Mo Yaoqing. She only briefly mentioned what happened in Linhai and focused on Ren Yufeng. She also gave the stone tablet she obtained from Ren Yufeng to Lord Daoist Jinghe to study. Since Lord Daoist Jinghe praised this Heaven and Earth fan so much, Mo Tiange planned to refine it as her natal magic weapon. These materials were hard to find in Linhai, but it wasn't impossible in the Celestial Pole. There were a few materials that were hard to find, so she had to spend a lot of money. Coupled with her connections in Xianqing School, there was still hope, so Lord Daoist Jinghe didn't object. Mo Tiange asked Lord Daoist Jinghe about some materials she didn't know about and informed the steward's hall to spread the news and try to find them. Among them, the most difficult to find were chalcedony over 1,000 years old and a piece of Qian stone. Although the other supplementary materials were few, as long as she offered a high price, there was still hope. These 2 things, on the other hand, could only be found by chance. Among them, Mo Tiange didn't know what Qian stone was. When she asked Lord Daoist Jinghe, he only said he read about it in ancient books and never saw it in reality. For this reason, Mo Tiange specially told the steward's hall that if there was a Qian stone, they should buy it no matter the price. In any case, with her current net worth, she could afford the heaven realm ordinary people talked about. Even if she really didn't have enough spirit stones, she still had a master behind her. After advancing to the core formation realm, in addition to refining her natal magic weapon, she also had to change cultivation techniques for the core formation realm and take spiritual herbs for the core formation realm. But Mo Tiange didn't need to worry about this. The Taiyuan record Zhong Muling gave her could be practiced until the deification realm, and the Sunu art of the origin could also be practiced until the nascent soul realm. Zhong Muling once said that if she practiced the Sunu art of the origin and entered the deification realm, she could naturally create her own cultivation technique according to her own unique conditions, so she didn't need to worry about cultivation techniques. Needless to say, she didn't even need to concoct spiritual herbs in the short term. Originally, she concocted a lot of soul-solidifying pills and clear sky pills to practice. In addition, after she formed her gold core, the school would reward her with a lot of medicinal pills and spirit stones, which would at least allow her to practice in closed-door meditation for several years without worrying about medicinal pills. Therefore, in the following time, she continued to cultivate and stabilize her realm while waiting for news about the materials for the Heaven and Earth fan. Of course, she could also collect magic weapons. After all, a core formation cultivator's ability in fights of magical power depended on magic weapons. Chapter 260. As they cultivated and waited, a year passed slowly. Mo Qingwei's name was now well known in West Kunwu. She was the most talented cultivator in Xianqing School after Qin Shoujing. Her talent surpassed those with single spiritual roots, and she had a great chance of advancing to the nascent soul realm. She definitely wasn't a fake genius like Qin Shoujing. Mo Tiange felt a bit bitter when she heard this news. Although she knew that person certainly didn't care about the title of genius, he was originally held in high regard. Now that he fell down like this, it was too cruel. Moreover, he failed to form his nascent soul 3 times before. Mo Tiange recalled the conversation they once had in Yunhui sect. At that time, she was in a bad mood. The people she could talk to were all dead and scattered. In the end, he was the only one left. That afternoon, they drank some wine. In a daze, she listened to him talk about some things. This memory was covered up by him using magic at that time. Now that she was also a core formation cultivator, this memory finally broke free and appeared in her mind. He said his aptitude wasn't the best, but he had never encountered a bottleneck in his cultivation. Maybe he was born to cultivate, so he didn't have any obsessions or attachments. In other words, he didn't have any superfluous feelings. Therefore, in this life, he just wanted to walk on the path to immortality like this. That being the case, even if he failed to form his nascent soul 3 times, he wouldn't lose confidence, right? But why did Master say he was haunted by a demonic barrier? Mo Tiange didn't think too much about things she couldn't figure out. Although she wasn't a decisive person, she wouldn't keep dwelling on things she'd already figured out. A year passed. Her cultivation level was almost stable, so she started to prepare magic weapons. Once she formed her gold core, she had to give up most of the fighting methods in the foundation building realm. In the core formation realm, she could develop the true power of magic weapons, so fights between core formation cultivators were actually fights between magic weapons. She had a few magic tools on her that needed to be replaced, so she encountered a major problem. Her magic weapons were only defensive or auxiliary magic weapons. Her attacks depended entirely on magic weapons, but she didn't have any offensive magic weapons right now. This problem made Mo Tiange hesitate for a few days. If she bought them, she definitely wouldn't be able to refine them herself. If she refined them, it would be too troublesome. In the end, it was Lord Daoist Jinghe who inadvertently asked about it and bestowed her with several magic weapons that finally solved this problem. Ever since she became his disciple in the aura refining realm, Lord Daoist Jinghe had never bestowed her with magic weapons or magic tools. He always said the treasures she possessed were too extravagant for a foundation-building cultivator, so there was simply no need to give her anything else. Mo Tiange also felt that she didn't lack anything, so she didn't ask for anything. However, there was a world of difference between core formation and foundation building. As a core formation cultivator, the treasures she had were completely insufficient. Lord Daoist Jinghe finally made his move, and because of this, he even said complacently that in the end, she still couldn't leave him, her master. Look, no matter how many fortuitous encounters she had, she still wanted him to bestow her with treasures. Mo Tiange resisted the urge to roll her eyes at him, but when she thought about it, she felt it was funny. Speaking of which, this master had always treated her extremely well. He had never been stingy with what he had given her, but he had never been able to make her feel grateful. He would rather give her things like this and let her say a few words. However, this was also his valuable point. He didn't treat his disciples with a benevolent attitude, and when he bestowed treasures, he also didn't ask for gratitude. In any case, the magic weapons Lord Daoist Jinghe gave her could be considered to have solved her urgent problem. Among them, there was a sword, a square seal, and a jade bottle. All of them were offensive magic weapons. The sword belonged to metal, the square seal belonged to earth, and the jade bottle belonged to water. Although they were all things Lord Daoist Jinghe didn't need, they were all high grade. Mo Tiange sighed inwardly. In the end, she benefited a lot from her master. As a cultivator from a cultivation group, she had a much easier time compared to individual cultivators. Otherwise, she didn't know how many spirit stones and energy she would have to spend to refine magic weapons. Back then, she had an elder-like second uncle, but it was already very difficult for her to earn spirit stones for her cultivation. If she was alone, how could she possibly concentrate on cultivating like she was now? After a while, when Mo Tiange had refined several magic weapons to the point where they could be used, she heard a piece of big news. Master! Upon hearing the news, Mo Tiange immediately rushed back to Shangqing Palace. Once she stepped into the main hall, she was stunned. Qin Shi was also in the hall. He was currently sitting in the seat she usually sat on, drinking tea with his eyes lowered. When he heard her voice, he didn't even raise his head to look at her. Mo Tiange quickly reacted. She first greeted Lord Daoist Jinghe, then greeted him. Senior Marshal Brother Shoujing. Qin Shi held the teacup and only responded softly. He still didn't look at her, as if he was only drinking tea. With their qualifications and cultivation levels, it wasn't rude of him to act like this. Not to mention that his cultivation level was much higher than Mo Tiange's, just based on their seniority in the school. He was worthy of her greeting since he entered the school many years earlier. However, his attitude made Mo Tiange feel a bit embarrassed. It seemed, he really didn't like seeing her. This embarrassment flashed past her heart. Mo Tiange turned around and asked, Master, is that thing true? Lord Daoist Jinghe seemed to not see the awkwardness between the two of them. He was holding a jade slip and reading something. Upon hearing her question, he put down the jade slip and said, Of course it's true. Is Master joking with you? Upon hearing his affirmation, Mo Tiange was both happy and anxious, but she was also a bit nervous. Master, what's the situation now? Lord Daoist Jinghe looked at her, then at Qin Shi. He said, I called you here because I knew you must be very concerned about this matter. This happened about a month ago. I also have several friends in Tiandao sect. After they discovered the abnormality, they wanted to look for treasures, so they came to invite me. Tiandao sect. In that case, the news should be correct. Lord Daoist Jinghe smiled, and his eyes lit up. Those old guys probably don't have the guts to deceive us nascent soul cultivators. Even if Tiandao sect is the #1 cultivation group in the celestial pole, our Xianqing school isn't easy to bully. Besides, they didn't only inform us, but they also informed many other nascent soul cultivators. Several of my other friends all received the news. Master. Qin Shi finally put down the teacup in his hand and looked at Lord Daoist Jinghe. Since it's most likely true, do you plan to go? Of course, Lord Daoist Jinghe said. Lord Daoist Jinghe said, when you went to Demonic Mountain that year, I didn't go with you because I happened to reach a crucial moment in my cultivation, but those old geezers took the lead. Now that Demonic Mountain is open, how could I not go? Qin Shi wasn't surprised at all. Master, what other news did you get? Tell me all at once. Lord Daoist Jinghe threw the jade slip in his hand to him. Take a look yourselves. Qin Shi took the jade slip and looked at it for a while with a profound gaze. He then threw the jade slip to Mo Tiange and picked up the teacup again, lost in thought. Mo Tiange took the jade slip and couldn't wait to read it. This jade slip was a communication jade slip from a nascent soul cultivator named Daoist Haifeng from Tiandao sect to Lord Daoist Jinghe. The content was very simple. It told Lord Daoist Jinghe that the restrictions on Demonic Mountain had weakened and would open soon, and he invited him to go with him. Tiandao sect was close to Demonic Mountain and fought against the Devil Path. These days, they found that the restrictions on Demonic Mountain showed signs of loosening. According to past experience, the restrictions in some places continued to weaken, and after 6 months to a year, entrances would appear. Reportedly, Demonic Mountain was the battlefield of the Great War between immortals and devils in ancient times. As far back as millions of years ago and as far back as hundreds of thousands of years ago, there were the remains of many cultivators and devil cultivators. If they could find a few of those treasures, they'd be incredible in the current era. Moreover, Demonic Mountain's terrain was special. Not to mention the whole celestial pole, it was probably impossible to find such a special place in the whole world. There were some special spiritual objects that couldn't be found anywhere else. Therefore, every time the restrictions on Demonic Mountain weakened, countless cultivators would rush to Mount Yuheng of Tiandao sect, wanting to get a share of the loot. Of course, it was very dangerous there. The last time the restrictions weakened was about 80 or 90 years ago. Most of the people who entered Demonic Mountain died, and Mo Tiange's father, Yi Hai, was one of them. Although it was so dangerous, people in the whole celestial pole still flocked to it like ducks. Demonic Mountain's restrictions simply didn't have any rules when they weakened. It might not happen even once in several hundred years. Not to mention aura refining and foundation building cultivators, even core formation cultivators might not encounter it even once in their entire lives. In contrast to the huge risks, there were huge fated chances. It was said that Master Song Feng, the first late nascent soul cultivator in the celestial pole, obtained a lot of treasures on Demonic Mountain and was able to cultivate a strange and invincible cultivation technique. But apart from Master Song Feng, almost no one would enter Demonic Mountain alone. Because if they wanted to enter safely, they had to be very familiar with the formations and restrictions, and they also had to have a strong fighting ability. None of these things could be possessed by one person. Demonic Mountain was really too big. Even if tens of thousands of people went in, it might still be very difficult to meet them, let alone several thousand people. Therefore, every time the restriction on Heavenly Devil Mountain weakened, Tiandao sect's cultivators would invite their friends to explore it instead of their own sect directly taking care of it. Of course, Tiandao sect was established next to Demonic Mountain to confront the Devil Path, so Demonic Mountain was like their back garden. If others wanted to go in, they had to give them some benefits. After Mo Tiange finished reading, she returned the jade slip to Lord Daoist Jinghe and lowered her head in contemplation. Lord Daoist Jinghe would definitely go. Ever since Mo Tiange worshipped him as her master, he had already reached the peak of the middle stage of the nascent soul realm, but he hadn't had a fated chance to break through to the late stage. Now was a good opportunity. Besides, he liked taking risks. Qin Shi also had to go. After failing to form his nascent soul 3 times, he urgently needed a fated chance to break through. Back then, he was only a little over 100 years old, but he was already in the middle stage of the core formation realm. He was at the height of his success, but he still took the risk to enter Demonic Mountain. How could he let go of this opportunity now? But Mo Tiange herself was a bit hesitant. In terms of cultivation level, although she was already in the core formation realm and took the first step to become a high-level cultivator, it was only the first step. She hadn't even refined her natal magic weapon yet, and as a core formation cultivator, her fighting ability wasn't enough. In addition, she was still young and had the virtual sky world as her backing, so she didn't need to look for any fated chances at all. As long as she cultivated slowly, it wasn't impossible for her to reach the nascent soul realm. But regardless of fated chances, Demonic Mountain had a reason to attract her. Her father was buried on Demonic Mountain. When she was in the aura refining realm, she thought she would find a chance to go to Demonic Mountain after she formed her gold core and bring her father's remains back. Now, she finally had such an opportunity. If she let it go, she didn't know how many years it would be before Demonic Mountain opened again. Chapter 261. After thinking for a while, Emotianga made up her mind. She looked up and said, "Master, I want to go." Lord Daoist Jinghe wasn't surprised at all. He nodded and said, "I won't stop you if you want to go, but you must prepare well in advance." This was exactly what Emotianga was worried about. She said, "Master, I haven't refined my natal magic weapon and just advanced, so my fighting ability is a bit weak. What should I do?" Lord Daoist Jinghe pointed at Qin Shi and said, "Then you should go with your senior martial brother. You can take care of him." Emotianga was stunned. "Master, aren't you going too?" Before Lord Daoist Jinghe could answer, Qin Shi said, "Master is a nascent soul cultivator, and he's invited by a group of friends, so he naturally has to go with them. It's inconvenient to take us with him." Over the years, Emotianga had long learned which places could and couldn't go. Nascent soul cultivators like them naturally went to places with more treasures and more dangers. Emotianga understood and asked, "Apart from senior martial brother Shoujing, are there any other senior martial brothers and sisters going with him?" Lord Daoist Jinghe said, "Demonic Mountain is full of danger. Even if everyone wants to go, the school can't let everyone go. Besides, for us cultivators, if our cultivation goes smoothly, we really don't need to go to such a dangerous place to look for fated chances." He glanced at her and said, "If I didn't know about your relationship with Demonic Mountain, I wouldn't have allowed you to go." Seeing Emotianga lowering her head, Lord Daoist Jinghe said angrily, "Why do you look so wronged? Do you want a bunch of people to go with you?" "No." Emotianga looked up blankly. "I'm just thinking about what to do." "Master, you're thinking too much." Lord Daoist Jinghe stared at her for a while and said, "This time, only your martial uncle Huayan and I will go with the nascent soul cultivators. As for the core formation cultivators, there will be a few, but your senior martial brother likes peace. He won't be happy if there are too many people. You should ask him what to do." Emotianga was stunned and couldn't help but look at Qin Shi. He was still looking down at the teacup in his hand as if he hadn't heard anything. She hesitated for a moment and finally asked, "Master, then, will I implicate senior brother Shoujing?" Since she had just formed her gold core, she didn't have a natal magic weapon, so it was inevitable that she would be a bit weaker in fights of magical power. If he traveled with her, she would definitely drag him down. "It's nothing." It was Qin Shi who answered. He still didn't look at her, and his tone was also very flat. "I have my own ideas about who to travel with. You don't need to worry about this." Emotianga originally had some sympathy for him, but after hearing what he said, she couldn't help but feel a hint of anger in her heart. He acted so arbitrarily that he didn't even consider her as a companion at all. In her heart, she was clear that her cultivation and ability were still far from this senior brother's, but his attitude was clearly because her master had entrusted her with this task, so he was protecting her. She did not like the feeling of relying on others. Emotianga's expression was very unsightly. Qin Shi didn't see it, but Lord Daoist Jinghe did. He glared at Qin Shi fiercely, then said to Emotianga, "Tianga, Master has already discussed this matter with your senior brother, and we also have an idea. You can rest assured." Lord Daoist Jinghe's words had the intention of shifting the blame onto her, so Emotianga didn't have much to say for the sake of her master. She just said, "Since Master and senior martial brother have already thought about it, I won't meddle too much in this matter. Lord Daoish Jinghe heaved a sigh of relief upon seeing her acting so obediently. He took out several jade slips and a map from his robe and handed them to her. Since you've decided to go, you should familiarize yourself with Demonic Mountain. I spent a lot of money to get this map from Tiandao sect, so take a good look. These are the records of many great cultivators throughout the ages, so you can refer to them. Go back first and take a look. If there's anything else, Master will send someone to tell you. Yes. These things couldn't be bought outside even with spirit stones. Mo Tiange knew this, so she didn't want to embarrass her master. Then disciple will take her leave first. As soon as Mo Tiange left, Lord Daoish Jinghe frowned. He threw the book in his hand and shouted at Qin Shi, "Brat, do you want to anger me to death? Look at your attitude." "Me what?" Qin Shi finally looked up and stared at Lord Daoish Jinghe, not understanding what had happened. Lord Daoish Jinghe was panting with rage. "I also didn't understand what was going on, but based on your attitude just now, I finally understand." Seeing that Qin Shi didn't look the slightest bit upset, he became even more annoyed and shouted, "What did you say just now? What do you mean you have your own plan and she doesn't need to worry?" Qin Shi looked puzzled. He said, "That's how it is. I've already thought about what to do, and it has nothing to do with her now." Lord Daoish Jinghe pointed at Qin Shi's nose. He was furious and paced back and forth. "You stinky brat. Damn brat. Slow brat." After cursing him for a while, Lord Daoish Jinghe sat back down, drank a cup of tea, and calmed himself down. "I originally didn't understand why you two were so stubborn and refused to explain. It turns out it's all because of your attitude. What about me?" Qin Shi was baffled by Lord Daoish Jinghe's accusation. He felt unhappy and turned his head away. "You still haven't done anything." Lord Daoish Jinghe raised his voice and glared at him for a while. "Don't you think you underestimated her too much? Do you think you have to take responsibility for everything because your cultivation level is higher than hers?" Qin Shi was stunned. He said, "Isn't that the case? My cultivation level is higher than hers, and I'm a man. Shouldn't I protect her?" Lord Daoish Jinghe was speechless for a while. After pondering for a while, he suddenly thought it was very interesting and couldn't help but laugh. His momentary anger and momentary laughter made Qin Shi even more confused. "Master, are you crazy?" Lord Daoish Jinghe held back his laughter and asked, "I remember there was no difference between men and women in your eyes before. Even if you traveled with female cultivators, you didn't want to protect them, did you?" Qin Shi frowned and said, "They're not related to me. Since we're traveling together for the same purpose, of course we're equal. Why should I do more?" Lord Daoish Jinghe laughed even more happily. "But you think you should protect her. That's natural. Not to mention anything else, if he loved someone, he would naturally want to protect her." Lord Daoish Jinghe's expression turned serious. "But she doesn't think so." Qin Shi was stunned. "Master, what do you mean?" Therefore, Lord Daoish Jinghe once again became a gossipy old woman for the sake of his disciple's life. Think about it. You think you're protecting her, but what does she think? She's formed her gold core and is finally in the same realm as you, but you still don't treat her as an equal cultivator and take responsibility for everything as if she can't do anything well. Seeing that Qin Shi was about to speak, Lord Daoish Jinghe reached out to stop him. "Let me finish. Ask yourself, have you ever looked down on her?" Qin Shi pondered for a while, then said, I know she's extraordinarily talented and decisive. If she was a cultivator of the same age as me, she definitely wouldn't be inferior to me. But she hasn't grown enough, so I should naturally protect her more. Besides, it's precisely because she grew very fast that I have to be ahead of her. Lord Daoish Jinghe was very satisfied with this answer. Child, you're already 200 years old, but you're still so muddle-headed. Fine, Master will tell you what's going on. You think you're a man and you should be stronger than her to protect her, but it's precisely because of this mentality that Tiange feels you're looking down on her and you think she's useless. Don't you know that? She's strong-willed, so how could she accept you looking down on her? His words made Qin break out in a cold sweat. He didn't dare to say that he indeed looked down on her in the beginning. If he said it, Master would definitely beat him. But when he realized this mentality, he tried hard to abandon it, so he thought that if the two of them were already in the nascent soul realm, they wouldn't have this kind of obstacle anymore. But in any case, even if they were cultivators in the same realm and Tiange had grown to the point where she could stand shoulder to shoulder with him, he felt he was a man, so he should stand in front of her, not to look down on her, but because of his self-esteem as a man, he should at least do something for her. His expression was gloomy and his heart was in turmoil. After a long time, Qin finally said, Master, what you said isn't the main reason. She doesn't have me in her heart, so what if she feels good? I don't ask for anything. I just want to form my nascent soul and wait. Maybe. Lord Daoish Jinghe was exasperated at his failure to meet his expectations. He glared at him and shouted, Are you stupid? If you don't give her a good feeling, her favorable impression of you will naturally decrease. If it decreases too much, of course she won't like you anymore. I don't care if you want to wait slowly, but if this kind of bad feeling keeps piling up, she'll be prejudiced against you in the end. Even if she knows it's a misunderstanding, it'll be hard for her to accept you. Do you understand? Qin somewhat understood, but he was also a bit confused. He thought for a long time, and his eyes became even more bewildered. Master, how do you know so much? Haven't you never performed dual cultivation before? Lord Daoish Jinghe didn't expect him to suddenly say that, so he was stunned for a moment. Soon, his face flushed, and he shouted embarrassedly, I'm almost 1,000 years old. What haven't I seen? You're making a fuss out of nothing. Qin didn't ask again. He lowered his head and thought for a long time, but in the end, he still shook his head. I still don't understand. Then you should understand. Lord Daoish Jinghe glared at him. Why do I have two disciples like you? It's such a mess that I'm worried. After his anger subsided, he leaned closer to Qin and said, Hey, I'm telling you, this is a good opportunity. If there's any misunderstanding between the two of you, it'd be best if you can clarify it. For a silly brat like you who doesn't understand the affairs of the heart, if you don't understand something, you should just ask. Little lovers are like this, even if they have something to say, they won't say it out loud. It's really troublesome. Chapter 262. Since she decided to go to Demonic Mountain, Mo Tiange immediately began to prepare for the trip. She just formed her gold core, so she didn't have many things a core formation cultivator should have. Fortunately, her master rewarded her, so she didn't have to be too shabby. Magic weapons were slightly refined. Even if they weren't as powerful as other core formation cultivators' natal magic weapons, they could at least put up a fight. She also had some magic weapons and talismans, which could be used in emergencies. Finally, there was the soul refining art. Because she wasn't afraid of chi deviation, her cultivation speed was very fast. Once she successfully formed her gold core, she automatically advanced to the third layer. The first layer of the soul refining art made her divine sense materialize and attack. The second layer weakened the spiritual aura pressure from high-level cultivators. The third layer strengthened her divine sense to a certain extent, and the spiritual aura pressure she emitted could even surpass her own cultivation level. In other words, she was only an early-stage core formation cultivator now. Once she emitted her spiritual aura pressure, she could make others think she was a middle-stage core formation cultivator or even a late-stage core formation cultivator. In addition, Mo Tiange carefully studied the map and information Lord Daoist Jinghe gave her. The terrain of Demonic Mountain was very special. Millions of years ago in the distant past era, immortals and devils fought here. Millions of years later, the Righteous Path and Devil Path fought on Demonic Mountain again. Until the end of the Middle Ages era, Devil Path cultivators still had several conflicts with Righteous Path cultivators. In the past several million years, Demonic Mountain had experienced the baptism of countless wars, leaving behind countless restrictions and turbulent spiritual might. Countless treasure seekers had entered and lost their lives here. Even now, there were countless treasures here, and corpses were everywhere. Opportunities and dangers existed side by side. After tens of thousands of years of exploration, the deceased seniors left behind precious maps and treasure hunting experiences for the cultivators of today. She memorized the places that people with different cultivation levels could go to, the places that were best not to go, and what kind of dangers there were. Mo Tiange memorized everything by heart. Thinking of Qin Shi's attitude, she couldn't help but feel a bit indignant. She knew her strength was far from this senior martial brother Shoujing's, but his attitude showed that he didn't take her seriously at all. She took a deep breath and calmed herself down. Although she still wanted to fight back, she couldn't be too stubborn about it. Otherwise, it would easily give rise to anger, which would be detrimental to her cultivation. A month passed quickly. Qin Shi sent her a message, telling her it was time to go. His tone was much softer than that day, and he carefully told her many things to pay attention to and what she should prepare. Mo Tiange held the summoning talisman in her hand and lightly flicked it, burning the talisman completely. She did as he said and brought everything she needed to prepare, then met up with him at the appointed time. As for Lord Daoist Jinghe, he had already said that he would go with Lord Daoist Huayan and let them do as they pleased. When the day arrived, Mo Tiange informed Lord Daoist Jinghe and went to the location of Qin Shi's Immortal's Cave. His Immortal's Cave couldn't be considered small, but it was the most secretive one among the several core formation cultivators on Clear Spring Peak. If someone didn't know better, they would think it was just an uninhabited mountaintop. Who to that behind was to a mountain was a core mountain. Who would thought there would be a core formation cultivators behind a formation? Cave was not to expect. Formation, core formation, formation. Even Mo Tiange herself didn't expect it, which was why she did that embarrassing thing back then. She actually got entangled with Bai Yanfei in front of his Immortal's Cave, which was really humiliating. Once again, she landed on the mountain. She flicked her sleeve, and a stream of spiritual aura knocked on the rock wall, making a dull sound. Before long, the rock wall quietly opened, and Qin Shi walked out. He saw Mo Tiange and said, "Let's go." Mo Tiange was stunned. Senior Martial Brother Shoujing, are we the only ones? Qin Shi flicked his sleeve, and a white cloud appeared under his feet. I've made an appointment with someone to go to Kuinzhong City. Kuinzhong City was a city in central Kunwu. It didn't belong to any cultivation group. Although it wasn't big, it was an important symbol of central Kunwu. Mo Tiange hesitated. Aren't we going with our fellow senior martial brothers and sisters? Qin Shi said, they have their own friends. Although we're from the same sect, it's better to go with someone who has the same thought. Upon hearing what he said, Mo Tiange didn't say anything else. She also flew up, but Qin Shi said, get on my flying cloud. You can save some spiritual aura. Flying didn't require a lot of spiritual aura, but since he expressed goodwill, she had no reason to refuse. She landed on his flying cloud and soared into the sky in an instant. The speed of this flying cloud was really amazing. Mo Tiange thought to herself that even if she flew at full speed with her cloud-treading boots, she wouldn't necessarily be able to reach this speed. Of course, this was also because her cultivation level wasn't high enough. Presumably, with his cultivation level, the speed of her cloud-treading boots wouldn't be inferior to his. The two of them flew out of Xianqing School's Great Mountain Protecting Formation. In an instant, they were far away on Mount Taikang. The speed of a core formation cultivator flying at full speed really couldn't be underestimated, especially when this flying cloud was clearly a top-notch flying magic weapon. Several days later, the two of them arrived at Kuanzhong City in central Kunwu. This wasn't Mo Tiange's first time in Kuanzhong City. Back when she wandered around with second uncle, she also came to this city and lived here for a while. This city wasn't big, but people came and went. It was the most prosperous cultivation city in Kunwu. It was said that in the beginning, this city was established by several individual cultivators with great divine power. At first, it was just a large market square for individual cultivators to do business. Who would have thought that it would grow bigger and bigger, and in the end, it would become a symbol of central Kunwu? Because this city didn't have any big force behind it, it had always been maintained by individual cultivators with great divine abilities. They didn't compete for territory, so the big cultivation groups didn't bother too much. Over time, it became a city of trade. Due to the tacit consent of the big cultivation groups, Kuanzhong City became the largest neutral land in Kunwu. On the way, the two of them didn't talk and just hurried on with their journey. Mo Tiange didn't have much to say, and Qin Shi also didn't seem to want to talk. It wasn't until they landed at the gate of Kuanzhong City that Qin Shi said, "Junior Marshal Sister Qingwei, these old friends of mine are generally trustworthy, but their characters are a bit strange. If you find anything strange, don't mention it in front of me, just ask me in secret." Mo Tiange was stunned. She still wasn't used to her Daoist name, and she was even more unaccustomed to Qin Shi calling her that. But she quickly regained her composure and nodded. "I understand." As soon as they entered Kuanzhong City, they saw cultivators everywhere. The two of them were both core formation cultivators, wore Xianqing School's Daoist robes, and they were both very young, so they attracted a lot of people's attention as soon as they entered the city. With core formation cultivators here, aura refining cultivators naturally didn't dare to approach them. Even foundation building cultivators stood on the side, waiting for them to pass. This was the first time Mo Tiange felt the aloof feeling of a high-level cultivator, so she felt a bit uncomfortable. Qin Shi, however, didn't feel anything. He just led her all the way into the city. This kind of rubbing shoulders made Mo Tiange feel very uncomfortable. The soul-refining art she practiced strengthened her divine sense, and spreading out divine sense was a cultivator's subconscious behavior. In the city, her divine sense was very messy, making her feel very uncomfortable. It was just like people with good hearing would feel more uncomfortable than ordinary people in noisy places. Qin Shi suddenly turned around and asked, "What's wrong with you?" Mo Tiange didn't expect he would notice her abnormality. She was stunned for a moment before she shook her head. "There are too many people." Qin Shi's gaze flickered and he said, "If something happens, I'll warn you. You should withdraw your divine sense for the time being." Mo Tiange hesitated for a moment before she nodded. She wasn't strong enough now, so it was useless to force herself. It'd be better to save some strength and use it at a critical moment. Seeing that she did as she was told, Qin Shi turned around and continued to lead the way. Before long, they entered a restaurant. He refused the mortal waiter's greeting and went up to the third floor with familiarity. After making several turns, he stopped in front of a door. The door hadn't been opened, but Mo Tiange already heard voices coming from inside. It was a sweet woman's voice. "Two people. Old Lei, you've lost. Hand over the things." Soon after, a voice as loud as a bell rang out. Damn it! Phone woman, you're not cheating, are you? Ha, if you're willing to bet, you're willing to accept your loss. Old lay, are you going to hand it over or not? Hand it over. The voice was extremely depressed, but it was very straightforward. However, it soon muttered, I won't bet with you in the future. Woman, you must be cheating. She pushed the door open. What are you betting on this time? His voice was obviously cold, but Emotinga felt it was a bit more real. Upon seeing him coming in, the voices inside immediately stopped. Soon after, a burst of fragrance assaulted their noses. It was a beautiful woman in pink, like a peach blossom blooming in early spring. She threw herself at Qin and called out in a sweet voice, Aya. You damned enemy. What took you so long? Qin shook his sleeve, sending out a wisp of spiritual aura to isolate the fragrance. He frowned and said, Don't talk nonsense. After being coldly reprimanded by him, the woman stood several dozen feet away. Her eyes were rolling as she stared at Emotinga, who followed him inside. She immediately complained coquettishly, Humph. Forgetting your old love when you have a new one. You're heartless. Enough. Madam Phone, I'm not in the mood to talk nonsense with you today. After he finished speaking, Qin walked to the other side of the room with a sullen expression. The woman blinked and asked a bald fat man not far from them, What's wrong with you today? You can't even take a joke. The bald fat man, who was holding a wine jar, glanced at Emotinga, who was following behind him with her head lowered. He said, Why don't you take a look? This time, he brought people with him. How could he let you casually joke around? The woman said, I used to joke around casually, but I've never seen him take it seriously. There were 4 people in this room. The woman who entered the room, the bald fat man behind her, a middle-aged Taoist, and a skinny old man. The middle-aged Taoist was in the late stage of the core formation realm, while the other 3 were in the middle stage. If these were her teammates on this trip, then her cultivation level was the lowest. Emotinga thought for a while, then watched Qin walk forward and greet the middle-aged Taoist and the skinny old man. Fellow Taoist Kumu, fellow Taoist Tong, I trust you've been well since we last met. The 2 of them had already seen him, so they stood up and greeted him back. The middle-aged Taoist stroked his beard and said with a smile, Fellow Taoist Shojing, it's been 80 years since we last met, but your cultivation level has already surpassed ours. Although the skinny old man's expression was stiff, there was a hint of a smile in his eyes as he looked at him. A faint smile appeared on Qin's face. Fellow Taoist Kumu, you're joking with me. I failed to form my nascent soul 3 times, and now I'm the laughingstock of Kunwu. I've lost a lot of face. Chapter 263. The skinny old man looked like a dead tree, but this middle-aged fellow Taoist called him Taoist Kumu. The skinny old man, on the other hand, used a proper name, Tong Tianyun. Hearing Qin's words, Taoist Kumu smiled. Fellow Taoist Shojing is too modest. What's so shameful about that? People like us, who have been stuck in the core formation realm for hundreds of years without any progress and don't even have the chance to form our nascent souls, are so envious of you. Qin smiled and said no more. He moved to the side and turned to look at Emotinga. Fellow Taoists, this is the junior martial sister I mentioned. Her Taoist name is Qingwei. Kumu and Tong Tianyun had long noticed Emotinga, but Qin didn't say anything. They were also embarrassed to stare at a female cultivator, especially since she was wearing Xianqing School's Taoist robe like Qin, so they were obviously from the same sect. Now that Qin introduced her, they finally looked at Emotinga. Emotinga raised her hand and saluted them. Greetings, fellow Taoists. Kumu and Tong Tianyun saw that she was gentle and quiet, so they also stood up and saluted back. Right after they greeted each other, the bald fatty with a loud voice shouted, "Qin Shoujing, this is your junior martial sister. I heard your master has an extraordinary disciple who formed her gold core before she was 100 years old. Is she the one?" She wasn't polite to this bald fatty. He said coldly, "Who else could it be? How could I have so many junior martial sisters?" Before the bald fatty could answer, the woman she called Madame Fong laughed first. "Old Lei, I told you long ago that the person he agreed to go with him must be someone close to him, but you didn't believe me. What do you think? I guessed right, didn't I? Not only did he agree to go with us, but he also brought her in person." The bald fatty hugged his wine jar and said unhappily, "Humph, you're good at calculating." He then raised his chin at Mo Tiange and said to Qin Shi, "None of the 5 of us are mediocre. Why did you bring a little girl who just formed her gold core? Demonic Mountain is full of danger. What should we do if you implicate us?" Qin Shi let out a humph and cast a glance at Mo Tiange. He then turned towards the bald fatty and said somewhat arrogantly, "You can also be considered not a mediocre person. If you're afraid of getting involved, I'll go with fellow Daoist Kumu and fellow Daoist Tong. Why do I need you? You." It was an obvious mockery. The fat on the bald fatty's face twitched, and he was about to fly into a rage. Qin Shi went on to say, "Although this junior martial sister of mine has just formed her gold core, she has a lot of treasures on her. Although her attacks are a bit inferior, self-defense isn't a problem. Besides, I'll take care of her safety. You don't have to worry about it." Even if they had some friendship with Qin Shoujing, these people were cultivators who had been in the cultivation world for hundreds of years. How could they allow a cultivator who had no ability to drag them down to travel with them? Now that they heard what he said, they all looked at Mo Tiange doubtfully. They believed that Qin Shoujing wouldn't lie, but how powerful could a cultivator who had just reached the core formation realm be? Under everyone's gazes, Mo Tiange showed a faint smile. "Fellow Taoists, is there anyone who wants to compare notes with me?" Kumu and Tong Tianyun didn't react to what she said. The bald fatty hugged his wine jar and was about to speak, but the woman beat him to it. The woman smiled before she spoke. She walked over and intimately held Mo Tiange's hand. "Little sister," before she could finish speaking and before her hand could touch Mo Tiange, Qin Shi flung his sleeve. A gust of wind blew, forcing her back several steps. After being beaten back by Qin Shi again and again today, the woman was also annoyed. She frowned and put her hands on her hips, looking like a shrew in the marketplace. She didn't have any of her previous flirtatious attitude. "Qin Shoujing, you're so unreasonable. I won't eat your junior martial sister. What do you mean by acting like this?" Qin Shi's expression didn't change. He looked at her hand and said, "If you talked to her nicely, I wouldn't have stopped you, but why did you smear poison on your hand?" The woman didn't feel embarrassed even though she was exposed. Instead, she showed a bright smile. "It was your junior martial sister who said she wanted to compare notes with me. I just wanted to test whether she was vigilant or not. Is that still not okay? You blocked it for her. What do you think about that?" Qin Shi said calmly, "Even if you used poison on her, it'd be useless. You might as well save your strength." "Huh?" The woman was confused. "What do you mean?" "Her physique is special. Her meridians and dantian are different from those of ordinary people. Your tricks are useless against her." Qin Shi looked at Mo Tiange and said, "Junior martial sister Qingwei, this is poisonous Lady Du Feng Jin. You can just call her Madame Feng. As for this one, his name is Lei Dongqing. Poisonous Lady Du Feng Jin." Mo Tiange's heart skipped a beat. She had heard a little about Poisonous Lady. She was an individual cultivator with extremely ruthless methods. Although the cultivation technique she practiced was righteous path, her methods were a bit evil. People who liked her called her Madame Fong, while people who didn't like her called her Poisonous Lady. She really didn't expect this senior martial brother Shojing to be involved with such a person. However, what Qin she said wasn't false. A cultivator's body had an extremely strong resistance to poison. If a cultivator wanted to be poisoned, they had to start from her meridians and dantian. Mo Tiange wasn't afraid of this. After going through the 5 spirits cultivation method, her meridians and dantian were extremely tough and hard to be injured. It was difficult for so-called poison to have any effect on her. Mo Tiange raised her hand. So it's Madame Fong and fellow Daoist Lei. Nice to meet you. She obviously didn't show the same courtesy to these two people as she did to Kumu and Tong Tianyun. Since these two people weren't polite enough to her, she also returned the courtesy. At that moment, Tong Tianyun, who had been watching them with a smile on his face, stood up. The old man glanced at Madame Fong and Lei Dongqing, then said to Mo Tiange with a smile, "When fellow Daoist Jingwei came in just now, I sensed that fellow Daoist's divine sense seemed to surpass cultivators in the same realm as you. How about letting me and fellow Daoist Jingwei have a fight of divine sense?" Fellow Daoist Tong. Both Madame Fong and Lei Dongqing were stunned for a moment before they blurted out. The so-called fight of divine sense could only be used by cultivators whose divine sense had reached a certain level. Generally speaking, only those who had formed their gold core could have such a level of divine sense. A sufficiently strong divine sense could simulate a cultivator's magic, and the simulated magic was directly related to the strength of the cultivator's fighting ability. Therefore, if cultivators didn't want to directly fight each other with their weapons, they could use their divine senses to simulate a fight of magical powers. This way, they could also compare who was stronger and who was weaker. However, this kind of fight of magical powers could also cause damage to one's divine sense, especially to those with weak divine senses. Mo Tiange saw that they seemed very surprised, so she guessed that this Tong Tianyun's divine sense might be very powerful. She then raised her head to look at Qin Shi, only to see him secretly nodding, so she said with a smile, "Fellow Daoist Tong, I've just formed my gold core, so I hope you won't go overboard." Daoist Kumu clapped his hands and said with a smile, "Although fellow Daoist Qingwei is young, you're very courageous. You're worthy of being Lord Daoist Jinghe's disciple. That being the case, how about this old Daoist be the mediator?" Qin Shi said, "Fellow Daoist Kumu's words are very good." Tong Tianyun also said, "It's naturally good to have fellow Daoist Kumu as the referee." A so-called fight of divine sense didn't require a large space, even a small room like this one was fine. However, this was a restaurant after all. Not only were there many mortals, but even the cultivators here were mainly low-level cultivators. It wasn't easy to see core formation cultivators here. Most of the core formation cultivators in Kuanzhong City were probably in this room. Mo Tiange originally thought they would change places, but unexpectedly, Daoist Kumu took out an upside-down glazed wine cup. His eyes were half closed as he mumbled something. After a while, he shouted, "Go!" The wine cup suddenly shone brightly and enlarged, covering half of the room inside. Mo Tiange looked up. Glazed was transparent, so the 5 of them could clearly see the outside from inside the wine cup. Daoist Kumu said with a smile, "Fellow Daoist Kumu, please, but you must be careful. Although my heaven-shrouding cup is a magic weapon, it can't withstand a full blow from the 2 of you." Tong Tianyun smiled while stroking his beard. "Fellow Daoist Kumu, you're too modest. 80 years ago, if it weren't for your heaven-shrouding cup, we might have died on Demonic Mountain." Mo Tiange's heart skipped a beat. Did they also go to Demonic Mountain 80 years ago? Before she could say anything, Tong Tianyun already said, "Fellow Daoist Qingwei, let's get started, shall we?" Mo Tiange had to put aside the matter just now and nodded. "All right, fellow Daoist Tong, please." The two of them stood in the middle, facing each other, and the other four people made way for them. Tong Tianyun and Mo Tiange closed their eyes at the same time and circulated their aura to adjust their breaths. As time passed, a gust of wind slowly flowed between them, rolling up their clothes and hair. Then, this gust of wind became stronger and stronger, gradually enveloping the two of them until they couldn't see their figures clearly. Upon seeing this scene, Lei Dongqing uttered an "huh" and said with a bit of astonishment, "Qin Shoujing, your junior martial sister has just formed her gold core, but her divine sense can already transform into wind." Transforming divine sense into wind looked simple, but in fact, it wasn't easy. Wind could only be generated when one's divine sense operated quickly. Who knew how many times their divine senses had exchanged blows for this scene in front of them to have such an effect? "Qin," she said faintly, "I've already told you. Although she's just formed her gold core, protecting herself won't be a problem." Although he hadn't seen her all these years, his master had already told him about her matters. At first glance, he knew the magic weapons in her hands weren't ordinary items. Moreover, the soul-refining art was originally given to senior martial brother Xianin by his master, so he naturally had confidence in her. The wind in the field became stronger and stronger, causing everyone's sleeves to flutter in the wind. Not only Mo Tiange and Tong Tianyun, but even the onlookers' expressions gradually turned solemn. Bang! All of a sudden, a loud sound came from the heaven-covering cup. The people trapped inside the cup felt as if the wind was being cut by a knife. Each of them operated their spiritual aura shields to resist this strong wind. Although each of them had their own unique skills, these two people were fighting with their divine senses, so they absolutely couldn't be disturbed, so they could only use their spiritual aura shields to resist. After the first sound, the heaven-covering cup continued to make loud noises one after another, each more violent than the last. Kumu frowned. He looked very surprised as he stared in Mo Tiange's direction. Since his heaven-covering cup made such loud noises, their fight of divine senses was obviously quite fierce. He knew how powerful Tong Tianyun's divine sense was. This little girl had just formed her gold core and didn't look very strong, but she actually had such a strong divine sense. All of a sudden, the inner wall of the heaven-covering cup exploded like firecrackers. The gale around them suddenly stopped, and the two of them finally showed themselves. When he looked up, he saw that Mo Tiange looked like she was in pain. Her eyes hadn't opened yet, but blood was flowing from the corner of her mouth. "Tiange." "Qin," she frowned. He quickly stepped forward, pulled her hand, and pressed her meridians. After a while, he heaved a sigh of relief and let go. On the opposite side, Tong Tianyun's expression also didn't look too good. He slowly opened his eyes and stared deeply at Mo Tiange. After a while, Mo Tiange finally caught her breath. She wiped the blood from the corner of her mouth, then cupped her hands towards Tong Tianyun with a smile. "I admit defeat." Tong Tianyun shook his head. "Fellow Daoist Qingwei, you don't need to be so modest. I've been stuck in the middle stage of the core formation realm for 300 years. Although I've never been able to make a realm breakthrough, there are very few cultivators in the same realm who can be my match. Fellow Daoist, you've just formed your gold core, but your divine sense is already this powerful, it's already very rare." This fight was naturally won by Tong Tianyun, but Mo Tiange's loss wasn't too ugly. Daoist Ku Mu's gaze shifted between the two of them. He then said with a smile, "Fellow Daoist Qingwei, this fight isn't about winning. Since fellow Daoist Tong said so, it means fellow Daoist has enough ability to travel with us. That being the case, the agreement between fellow Daoist Shoujing is valid." From now on, fellow Daoist is our companion. Chapter 264. Having obtained Daoist Kumu's approval, Mo Tiange smiled and cupped her hands. Thank you very much. She knew clearly that Daoist Kumu and Tong Tianyun might be doing this for Qin Shi's sake. However, she also had confidence in herself. Even if she couldn't help them, she wouldn't drag them down. Moreover, who could compare to her in terms of escape strategy? Even the noisy Lei Dongqing and Madame Feng were speechless after this competition. Seeing Daoist Kumu put away the heaven-covering cup and start talking again, the two of them said their goodbyes and left, looking very bored. Tong Tianyun looked at the two of them, then turned around and said to Mo Tiange with a smile, "Fellow Daoist Qingwei, please don't mind them. They've always been like this." Mo Tiange smiled back, but before she could say anything, Qin Shi already said, "Fellow Daoist Kumu, fellow Daoist Tong, my junior martial sister and I came from afar and haven't settled down yet, so we should take our leave first." Since he said so, the two of them couldn't stay any longer, so they made an inviting gesture and saw them off. Mo Tiange followed Qin Shi. As soon as he went down the restaurant, someone immediately came to greet them and took them to a secluded courtyard. Qin Shi entered the courtyard, casually laid a defensive formation and took the lead into the small hall. This courtyard was very elegant. It was spring now, so there were many peach trees planted in the courtyard. The trees were full of peach blossoms, and the fragrance of peach blossoms assailed their nostrils. Inside the small hall, there were exquisite wooden tables, chairs, and stools. Peach blossoms were in full bloom in a blue enamel vase, making the place even more elegant. All the objects were placed in the most suitable places. They were clean and spotless, and even the tea was warm. Mo Tiange looked around and saw that Qin Shi had casually chosen a seat and sat down. He poured 2 cups of tea and held one for himself. She hesitated for a moment, then sat down on the other side and slowly picked up the other cup. Steam rose up and blurred their vision. Neither of them said anything. After a while, Mo Tiange heard his voice. Daoist Kumu and Tong Tianyun are both individual cultivators in Kuanzhong City. Although they don't belong to any cultivation group, their skills are extraordinary. They each have their own secret techniques, and they're the best among core formation cultivators in the whole of Kunwu. Mo Tiange paused for a moment before answering softly. Qin Shi continued on, "As for Lei Dongqing and Madame Feng, you mustn't underestimate them. Lei Dongqing is actually a cultivator from Tiandao's sect, but because he offended someone in the sect, he was sent to a remote place. Although his cultivation level is only in the middle stage of the core formation realm, his divine power is extraordinary. As for Madame Feng, her tricks are very strange, and it's very difficult for ordinary people to guard against her. She doesn't like you now, so you must be very careful when you face her alone." After a moment of silence, Mo Tiange asked, "Why doesn't she like me?" Qin Shi raised the corners of his lips, revealing a faint smile. "Don't be fooled by Madame Feng's flirtatious ways. In fact, she's the most arrogant one. She usually looks down on female cultivators who don't make progress, especially female cultivators from big cultivation groups. Their cultivation conditions are obviously excellent, but very few of them make progress. Now that she has seen you for the first time, she only knows your identity, so naturally she doesn't like you." Upon seeing the smile on his face, Mo Tiange blurted out, "Senior Marshal Brother, do you like people like Madame Feng?" As soon as she asked, she realized she went a bit too far, so she immediately said, "I was being rude. Senior Marshal Brother, please don't blame me." Qin Shi was stunned for a moment before he said, I usually don't like women, especially those female cultivators who obviously have good aptitudes but only know how to fight for a man's favor. They're really wasteful." Although Madame Feng's temperament isn't compatible with mine, I like her on this point, so I'm also willing to be friends with her. I see, Mo Tiange murmured. She then changed the topic and asked, Senior Martial Brother Shoujing, fellow Daoist Tong said more than 80 years ago, if it weren't for Daoist Kumu's sky-covering cup, all of you would have died on Demonic Mountain. What's going on? This. Qin Shi muttered to himself for a moment then said, I won't hide it from you. I met those people when I went out on a trip after I formed my gold core. Later, we agreed to go to Demonic Mountain, and it was on this trip that I met your father. Mo Tiange suddenly looked up and stared at him. Under her gaze, Qin Shi slowly said, in the beginning, there were quite a lot of people who went with us. Later, many people died unexpectedly, and only 7 or 8 people were left. Later, your father and I were separated from them. They retreated in time, so we managed to keep our lives. However, your father and I were trapped inside and couldn't escape. This was the first time Mo Tiange heard the person in question mention her father. Her gaze flickered, and she slowly asked, Senior Martial Brother Shoujing, my father. How did he die? Qin Shi turned his face away. It was a bit difficult for him to meet her gaze, so he tried his best to suppress his tone. Your father and I were trapped on Demonic Mountain for nearly 10 years. We encountered countless dangers, and we were also injured. Later, your father was heavily injured and couldn't drag on any longer, while I was stuck in my cultivation realm and couldn't escape. In the end, your father really couldn't drag on any longer, so he said he would do his best to help me escape. If I really escaped with my life, I would promise him a few things. He originally didn't care too much about this part of the past. Demonic Mountain wasn't the only danger he'd experienced in his life, but now, it had a different meaning to him. If he hadn't met Yi Hai on Demonic Mountain back then, if he hadn't been trapped together with Yi Hai, if he hadn't promised Yi Hai's requests, they probably wouldn't have been involved in this life. After hesitating for a moment, he finally said, Tiange, about your father's matter, I did it for myself, Mo Tiange's gaze flickered, but she soon shook her head. Senior Martial Brother, you don't have to do this. Even without you, my father would have been trapped on Demonic Mountain in the end. Besides, you also promised him a lot of things, so we're even. Qin Shi was silent. At first, he didn't think what he did was wrong. Based on the personality of cultivators, it wouldn't be a big crime for him to forcibly seize Yi Hai's cultivation when Yi Hai was heavily injured. However, he wasn't the kind of person who didn't care about his state of mind, so he made a fair deal with Yi Hai. That way, he would have a clear conscience and could also save himself from inner demons. However, this matter was related to her past, so he couldn't help but feel a trace of guilt. The two of them sat for a while. Qin Shi couldn't stand the silence anymore, so he took the initiative to speak. I remember the place where your father died very clearly. At that time, I didn't bring his remains out, so I don't know if they're still intact after so many years. Let's go to Demonic Mountain and take a look there. Mo Tiange forced a smile but didn't answer. She shouldn't care so much about the remains. Just like back then, when she couldn't find Tianxiao's ashes, Qin Shi told her this, cultivators shouldn't be bound by external things. People were already dead, and burial was only to comfort the living, so she should follow her heart. However, her father's death had been a knot in her heart for so many years. She still hoped to finish what she started and bring her father's remains back to be buried with her mother. Seeing that she still didn't speak, Qin Shi pondered for a while then said, aside from the 4 of them, there's another cultivator from Gujin's sect who hasn't arrived yet. When that person also arrives, we can set off. Mo Tiange answered softly. In any case, he had his own ideas about these things, so she couldn't interfere. The 2 of them really had nothing to say, so they sat for a while. Then Mo Tiange asked, Senior Martial Brother Shoujing, how long are we going to stay here? Probably in 3 to 5 days. Gujin sect isn't far from here. That person already sent a message, so they should set off in 1 or 2 days. In the end, she couldn't stand the silence anymore. He wanted to take the initiative to speak, but Mo Tiange stood up first. Senior Marshal brother, I'm going to adjust my breath for a while. Where will I stay? Shi's eyes flashed with disappointment. He pointed to the side and said, you can pick any room you want. It doesn't matter. All right. Mo Tiange didn't say anything else and left without saying anything else. Shi sat alone for a while. Looking at the 2 cups of tea on the table, he suddenly did a very ridiculous thing. He reached out to take the teacup she didn't drink from, drank it up, and put the cup in his pocket. After Lei Dongqing, Madame Feng, Qin Shi, and Mo Tiange left, Daoist Kumu and Tong Tianyun sat in the side room for a while without saying anything. Daoist Kumu raised his hand, and a soundproof barrier appeared around the 2 of them. Fellow Daoist Tong, what do you think? Tong Tianyun pondered for a while, then picked up a black chess piece and put it on the empty chessboard. We'll have to wait and see. Daoist Kumu stroked his beard and smiled. Fellow Daoist Tong, it seems you have a very high opinion of this Master Daoist Qingwei. A smile appeared on Tong Tianyun's dry, almost fleshless face. It's not easy for a cultivator who's just formed her gold core to be able to do this. She's worthy of being an outstanding disciple of a famous cultivation group. Daoist Kumu nodded. I couldn't sense the fight between the 2 of you. This shows that this Master Daoist Qingwei's divine sense is also extraordinary. An early-stage core formation cultivator's realm might still be stable, but she's actually able to do this. It's really not easy. At this point, the meaning of his words changed. But isn't this too hasty? Whether it's Lei Dongqing, Madame Feng, or fellow Daoist Jing, they're all famous core formation cultivators in Kunwu. Even if Qin Shoujing's cultivation level surpasses all of ours, leading a newbie who's just formed her gold core seems a bit. Brother Kumu, why are you worried? Tong Tianyun grinned. His face was dry and small, so when he smiled, he looked really scary. Why don't you think about it this way? It's said that this Master Daoist Qingwei's aptitude is extremely high, far surpassing her peers. She formed her gold core at such a young age and is known as Xianqing School's most talented genius cultivator. This kind of person has a boundless future, so why are they willing to let her go to Demonic Mountain and take risks? Among us, you and I don't have much time left in our lifespans, and we're individual cultivators, so we have no choice but to risk our lives. Madame Feng, Lei Dongqing, and fellow Daoist Jing all have their own difficulties. Even Qin Shoujing, although he's still young and his cultivation level is also the highest, he's failed to form his nascent soul 3 times. Everyone has their own reasons, so they have no choice but to take risks. What about fellow Daoist Qingwei? Let's not talk about her own reasons, but why does Xianqing School want to let her go? Maybe they believe Qin Shoujing can protect her, but if she's really an idiot, she's not worthy of Qin Shoujing's protection, right? That's true. Daoist Kumu picked up the white chess piece and put it opposite the black one. However, with this kind of divine sense, this fellow Daoist Qingwei definitely isn't an idiot. I just don't know whether she's worthy of being called a genius or not. Chapter 265. Mo Tiange stayed in Kuanzhong City for several days. In addition to adjusting her breath and cultivating in this small courtyard, she occasionally went out for a walk. Although Kuanzhong City couldn't be compared to a big city in the secular world, it was the #1 trading city in Kunwu. It would be a waste not to walk around here. Although it was difficult for cultivators above the core formation realm to find treasures they liked in this kind of ordinary market square, a trading city was a trading city after all. Kuinjong City was known in Kunwo for having everything you could think of but nothing you couldn't buy. It had its own uniqueness. Before leaving, Mo Tiange took some of the materials the school collected for her to refine the heaven and earth fan with her. Now that she thought about it carefully, she realized there wasn't much difference. Those miscellaneous materials were all collected. The only thing she lacked were the 1,000-year-old chalcedony and the Qian stone. Qian stone was indeed rare, not many people even knew about it. Although many people knew about the 1,000-year-old chalcedony, it rarely appeared in the world. Even if it did, it would be quickly bought. Mo Tiange had lived in Kuinjong City before, so she knew there were trade fairs for high-level cultivators in this city, so she sent a summoning talisman to Qin Shi and mentioned it. Qin Shi quickly replied to her, saying he knew and would take her there. Mo Tiange was dazed for a while after receiving this reply. The reason why she asked Qin Shi was because he said Daoist Kumu and Tong Tianyun were individual cultivators in Kuinjong City. With their cultivation levels, they must be among the city's municipal officials, so they naturally knew about these trade fairs. She didn't expect Qin Shi would take her there himself, but she couldn't refuse. After thinking about it, it wasn't a big deal. Trade fairs were like this. What did it matter if other people were there or not? Sure enough, Qin Shi sent her a message that night. Mo Tiange packed her things, opened the door, and saw him standing outside. Senior Marshal Brother Shoujing. Qin Shi nodded. Without beating around the bush, he said directly, "Let's go. If you want to go to the trade fair, there'll be one soon." Judging from his attitude, he seemed to be very familiar with this Kuinjong City. Mo Tiange silently followed behind him. She didn't use her flying technique and just walked around the city in twists and turns. It was the middle of the night. The bustling Kuinjong City during the day was quiet. Only a few cultivators were hurrying on their way, and mortals were nowhere to be seen. Most of these cultivators had high cultivation levels and had the same goal. Mo Tiange watched as these cultivators all walked towards the tallest Kuinjong pagoda in the city. Qin Shi led her in the same direction. Unexpectedly, after walking for a while, he pulled her hand and whispered, "This way." His fingers were slightly cold, carrying the special coldness of a cultivator. They parted as soon as they touched. The two of them entered the back door of a nearby shop. This back door had other mysteries. As soon as they pushed the door open and entered, a low-level cultivator said in a low voice, "Welcome, Senior." It was a woman's voice, and it was very sweet. No matter where it was, there was no lack of female cultivators as a means of receiving guests. Mo Tiange sighed inwardly but didn't say anything. She just followed Qin Shi. There was a female cultivator leading the way in front of them. They entered the courtyard and then entered a tunnel. Soon, the view in front of them suddenly became clear. "Seniors, please do as you please. If there's anything you need, please call us." The aura-refining female cultivator respectfully bowed then retreated into the darkness. Mo Tiange looked around. The layout of this small hall was simple and there were a lot of chairs placed around it. Several cultivators were resting and waiting. Among these people, the lowest cultivation level was in the middle stage of the foundation building realm. Aside from them, there were also two core formation cultivators. Qin Shi gestured, and the two of them found a corner to sit down. He then raised his hands, laying a soundproof barrier. He said to her, "This is a trade fair for the highest level people in Kuinjong City. Even Kuinjong City's administrators will participate." Mo Tiange was a bit surprised. They also need to participate in the trade fair. Qin Shi smiled and said, "Kuinjong City doesn't have a city lord. There are only several highly respected individual cultivators who form an individual cultivator alliance to manage the trade fair. Even so, they don't have any special privileges when it comes to trading. They just have more sources of information, so it's easier for them to find what they need. This management method is indeed special, Mo Tiange thought inwardly. Qin Shi continued to say, the Individual Cultivator Alliance in Kuanzhong City has a total of 7 core formation cultivators, and one of them will preside over this trade fair. In this trade fair, they'll allow 1 or 2 of Kuanzhong City's best shops to auction off their best treasures. After that, cultivators can trade among themselves as long as they pay a small fee. This trade fair is also famous in Kunwu. Cultivators below the core formation realm can only participate if they have some background. Core formation cultivators often come because of its reputation. Mo Tiange was stunned. There are actually so many core formation cultivators in Kuanzhong City. If they could trade among themselves, there should be at least 10 of them, right? Qin Shi shook his head. These cultivators came here specifically to trade, they won't stay. How can core formation cultivators be so easy to meet? Usually, there are only about 10 of them in Kuanzhong City, and most of them are members of individual cultivator alliances. Otherwise, how could they manage Kuanzhong City? If there were that many core formation cultivators, this individual cultivator alliance probably wouldn't be able to suppress them. The two of them sat for a while before Qin Shi asked, Junior Marshal Sister Qingwei, what do you want to buy? Don't tell me you can't buy it from the steward's hole. Mo Tiange couldn't quite get used to the way he kept calling her. After a while, she finally answered, it's materials to refine a natal magic weapon. The steward's hall has collected most of the materials, but it's still lacking 2 rare items. What are they? 1,000-year-old chalcedony and Qian stone. Qin Shi frowned and said, 1,000-year-old chalcedony can be seen occasionally, but it has a wide range of uses. It can be used to concoct medicinal pills and refine tools, so it's usually bought at a high price as soon as it appears. You need a bit of luck to get it. As for this Qian stone, I remember seeing it in a small place about 100 years ago. Unfortunately, I didn't know what it was at that time and didn't buy it. So many years have passed, and I don't know whose hands it is now. Mo Tiange was delighted. Senior Marshal Brother Shoujing, do you know what Qian stone looks like? Qin Shi nodded. But that was 100 years ago. If you want me to find it, I won't be able to do anything. That won't be necessary. Mo Tiange smiled and said, few people know about this Qian stone. I asked my master, but even he only heard of it and never saw it. He also doesn't know what it looks like, so he can't find it. Seeing her smiling face, Qin Shi was stunned and didn't answer for a long time. Mo Tiange thought he was unwilling, so she slowly stopped smiling. If it's not convenient for Senior Marshal Brother, forget it, no. Qin Shi shook his head and said, let me think. It doesn't seem to have any obvious characteristics. But if I can see it, I'll definitely recognize it. Some ores looked very similar, but the spiritual aura they contained was slightly different. It couldn't be explained clearly with words, but if you looked carefully, you could still distinguish them. Mo Tiange was happy but also a bit disappointed. In that case, it was useless for her to be anxious. Qin Shi thought for a while then said, you don't need to be anxious. Even if we can't find it for a while, entrusting it to Daoist Kumu and fellow Daoist Tong is the same. They're well informed, so as long as these 2 things appeared in Kuanzhong City, they definitely won't be able to hide it from them. This was also a way out of desperation. In the end, there was a bit more hope, so Mo Tiange said, that's good. I'll have to trouble Senior Marshal Brother Shoujing. Qin Shi nodded then cast a glance at her from the corner of his eyes. He then asked, what if we can't find it in a short time? Without a natal magic weapon, we'll always be a bit weaker. The 2 things you're looking for are both things that can only be found by chance, not sought. Mo Tiange was also quite hesitant. I only have 1 natal magic weapon. I'm not willing to use it randomly. Every core formation cultivator had this kind of mentality. A natal magic weapon was related to one's ability in fights of magical powers. If one randomly chose it, even if it could grow, it would still be slightly inferior to others. Who would be willing to have a lower starting point than others? However, if one wanted a high-grade magic weapon as their natal magic weapon, it would be relatively difficult to find. If they didn't refine it, it would have a greater impact on their ability in fights of magical powers. Qin understood her very well. He nodded and said, "If I hadn't accidentally obtained the refining formula for the 3-yang real fire sword when I was building my foundation, I'm afraid I would have been the same as you." Mo Tiange also felt a bit regretful that she didn't say this earlier. At that time, she was wholeheartedly focused on forming her gold core. She always felt that a natal magic weapon was something that should be considered after she formed her gold core, so she didn't take it to heart. The two of them sat, each thinking about their own matters. After a while, a foundation building cultivator finally came in and said loudly, "Seniors, fellow Taoists." Everyone's gaze fell on him. They heard him say, "I've made you wait for a long time. Please follow me." Mo Tiange turned to look at Qin Shi. Qin Shi nodded at her. The two of them stood up, followed the flow of people, walked down another aisle, and entered another small hall. This small hall was much more exquisite than the previous one. There was an enormous round table in the middle, which could seat about 30 people. There were already some people sitting around it. Some people were like them, not wearing any disguises, but most of them were wearing black robes and bamboo hats. Mo Tiange used her divine sense to scan the area. She was greatly surprised to find that this bamboo hat actually blocked her divine sense easily. Qin Shi touched her lightly, then casually chose a seat and signaled her to go over. Mo Tiange looked around and saw that everyone was the same, so she followed the flow. As the two of them sat down, she heard Qin Shi's secret message: "Some people here can't be identified, so they're dressed like this. Don't use your divine sense on them at will." Mo Tiange nodded lightly. Although she had been to many places when she was young, she had never had the opportunity to experience a trade fair held by high-level cultivators, so she didn't know about the taboos. After everyone sat down, Mo Tiange roughly looked around and found that there were actually 10 core formation cultivators present, including herself and Qin Shi. In addition, there were also about 10 middle stage and late stage foundation building cultivators. There were only about 20 people in such a secret trade fair, so it must be a rare event. She just didn't know what kind of treasures there were. Before long, someone came in from the side door. His smiling expression looked very frightening. It was Tong Tianyun. Tong Tianyun came in. His gaze swept over Qin Shi and Mo Tiange. He nodded with a smile, then immediately looked away. He said loudly, "I'm Tong Tianyun from Kuanzhong City's Individual Cultivator Alliance. Greetings, fellow Taoists." When a middle-stage core formation cultivator saluted, the foundation building cultivators present didn't dare to accept it no matter how high their status was. They all stood up and saluted him. As for the core formation cultivators, most of them just sat and saluted him back. Tong Tianyun naturally wouldn't fuss about it. After he saluted them, he said with a smile, "Since everyone can come here, you naturally know the rules of the trade fair. I won't say anything more. Let's start." Chapter 266. Tong Tianyun clapped his hands. Immediately, female aura refining cultivators carried several trays covered with red cloths. Since Mo Tiange didn't use her divine sense, she didn't know what was under the red cloths. Presumably, other people were the same, so they all stared at the red cloths silently. After the female aura refining cultivators put down the trays and left, Tong Tianyun said, "Ladies and gentlemen, let's cut to the chase. These treasures are from the collection of the largest shop in Kuanzhong City, 10,000 Treasures House. Please take a look and see if you're interested. Unlike ordinary auctions, where the items were presented one by one, Tong Tianyun directly lifted all the red cloths, exposing the items on the 3 trays to everyone. There was a small golden ring, a flame-colored jade, and a jade box. Tong Tianyun opened the jade box and saw a several thousand-year-old snow gall grass inside. This is the Vajra ring. Ladies and gentlemen, don't underestimate it. The collection of 10,000 Treasures House is naturally extraordinary. This ring is a high-grade magic weapon and can be big or small. If you use it freely, it can even split mountains and rocks. Mo Tiange only took a glance at it before looking away. This magic weapon wasn't bad, but it was a bit worse than the 3 magic weapons Lord Daoist Jinghe gave her. Most of the core formation cultivators present weren't interested, but the foundation building cultivators' eyes lit up. This is fire pattern jade. Fellow Taoists who know its value don't need me to introduce it. Mo Tiange had seen it in ancient records. When refining a fire attribute magic weapon, it would increase its power by a lot. She remembered that Qin Shi cultivated a fire attribute cultivation technique, so she turned to look at him. However, she saw that he looked bored and didn't even look at the 3 items. After thinking for a while, she understood. No matter how good this fire pattern jade was, it would be useless after he advanced to the nascent soul realm. This snow gall grass is already 3,000 years old. Everyone is knowledgeable and knows its price, so I won't say much. This was what Mo Tiange was least interested in. 3,000-year-old spiritual plants were everywhere in the virtual sky world. Once Tong Tianyun finished looking, his eyes swept over everyone present, immediately distinguishing who was interested and who wasn't. He smiled and said, "Our trade fair doesn't allow open bidding. Even if it's your first time here, you should know the rules. In the time it takes for an incense stick to burn, everyone should think carefully about what price to offer. Remember, if you're making a bid, you're not allowed to communicate with each other. If you communicate with each other, only one person is allowed to make a bid. Begin now." With a wave of Tong Tianyun's hand, several other aura-refining female cultivators carried jade tablets and distributed them to everyone. Each person received 3 tablets, each of which was marked with 3 kinds of items. Mo Tiange was puzzled, but she soon heard Qin Shi's voice. The rule of this trade fair is bidding. Everyone has to put their bid on the jade tablet, and the highest bidder wins. This was something new. In this way, there would be many more variables, and there would be less malicious bidding. There wouldn't be a situation where the price would be driven up. Presumably, ordinary cultivators would support this. After all, if the price was driven up, it would be the competitor's loss. Mo Tiange raised her head and swept her gaze over the 20 or so cultivators at the round table. Some were scratching their ears and cheeks, some were immersed in contemplation, and some didn't seem to care. Mo Tiange noticed that there was a person on the opposite side who was like them. He didn't even look at the items on the table. The jade tablet given to him was also placed on the table, untouched. His head was lowered as if he was resting with his eyes closed. Although he seemed to be resting, he was also one of the people wearing black clothes and a bamboo hat, so she couldn't see his expression. Aside from Qin Shi, this person had the highest cultivation level among the people present. He was already in the late stage of the core formation realm. Judging from his indistinct spirit, his fighting ability wasn't weak either. She turned to glance at Qin Shi, but she saw that he was also looking at this person. Mo Tiange sent him a secret voice transmission. "Senior Marshal Brother Shoujing, is there something wrong with this person?" Qin Shi shook his head lightly. "He's just a bit strange." She was about to ask what was strange about it, but the time it takes for an incense stick to burn was up. Tong Tianyun said loudly, "Everyone, stop bidding." Upon hearing his words, everyone quieted down. Some people showed a determined expression and quickly wrote their bids. Afterward, the aura-refining female cultivators stepped forward, collected the jade tablets, and gave them all to Tong Tianyun. As Tong Tianyun sorted the jade tablets one by one, most of the people present stared at his movements. After a while, Tong Tianyun smiled and said, "This Vajra ring was won by fellow Daoist number 5 with 8,000 spirit stones. The fire pattern jade was won by fellow Daoist number 18 with 5,000 spirit stones, and the 3,000-year-old snow gall grass was won by fellow Daoist number 11 with 15,000 spirit stones." Mo Tiange was startled by this price. Although she rarely went to market squares, she also knew the prices. This Vajra ring was a magic weapon after all, so 8,000 spirit stones was indeed a bit cheap. As for the fire pattern jade, she didn't know much about it. Presumably, it wasn't a very rare material, so 5,000 spirit stones should be enough. A 3,000-year-old snow gall grass for 15,000 spirit stones was a bit too expensive. After all, Kunwu was right next to a forest. As long as one had the courage to adventure in the south, spiritual plants weren't too rare. Besides, this snow gall grass was an ordinary spiritual plant, it was just a bit older. As if he could see her confusion, he said softly, "After the demonic beast riot, the various cultivation groups in Kunwu haven't recovered their strength yet, so the price of spiritual plants has risen a lot. Moreover, bidding has always been like this. It's possible to buy an item at an extremely low price, but it's also possible to buy it at a much higher price than the market price." Mo Tiange didn't say anything else. From her point of view, these 3 items from the so-called House of 10,000 Treasures weren't anything special. If they were placed among foundation-building cultivators, they would naturally be fought over, but if they were placed among core formation cultivators, they were only ordinary goods. Many people weren't even in the mood to bid. It seemed the main point of this trade fair was still the word transaction. This auction and bidding were just a warm-up. However, there was always a gaze directed at her from the front, making her feel very uneasy. She raised her head, but she couldn't find the source of the gaze. After the bidding ended, Tong Tianyun told the maids to collect the spirit stones from the successful bidders and trade the goods. Afterward, he also sat down and said with a smile, "All right, the bidding is over. Our trade fair should also officially start. Fellow Taoists, let's start with me, what do you think?" Although it was a question, it was only a formality. Once Tong Tianyun finished speaking, he took out a cloth bag from his robe and poured out a pile of brightly colored stones. Upon seeing these things, the eyes of the disinterested core formation cultivators lit up. As for the foundation building cultivators, their expressions were blank. Obviously, they didn't know what these things were. Mo Tiange was ashamed to discover that she also didn't know what they were. It hadn't been long since she became a core formation cultivator, so most of the things she knew came from ancient records. If she hadn't read them, she naturally wouldn't know what they were. "Qin," she said in a low voice, "these are crystal soul jades. I really don't know where old Tong got so many of them." Seeing the interest in his eyes, Mo Tiange couldn't help but ask curiously, "Senior Marshal Brother Shoujing, what's the use of these things?" "Qin," she said, "crystal soul jades are very rare. They're usually used on magic weapons because they can automatically gather spiritual aura. If a magic weapon is embedded with crystal soul jades, it'll automatically absorb spiritual aura. Therefore, magic weapons embedded with crystal soul jades will be more powerful than ordinary magic weapons." Mo Tiange pondered for a moment, then said, "This seems to be a characteristic of crystal jade from the distant past era, correct? The so-called crystal soul jades are actually flawed crystal jades. In the distant past era, crystal jades were everywhere in the world. Substandard ones were called crystal stones, while flawed ones were called crystal soul jades. Nowadays, crystal jades have long disappeared from the world, and crystal soul jades are also extremely difficult to find. Mo Tianga's heart skipped a beat. Crystal stone. Could it be the crystal stone she read about in the ancient records of the virtual sky world, the crystal stone used by mechanical puppets? It's actually a substandard crystal jade. If that's the case, it's no wonder that the art of engineering was lost. Crystal jades can't be found nowadays, and the same goes for crystal soul jades. It's just that I don't know whether these crystal soul jades are useful or not. Tong Tianyun took out the crystal soul jades and didn't say anything else. Among the core formation cultivators, someone finally couldn't help but ask, "Fellow Daoist Tong, what do you want to exchange these crystal soul jades for?" Tong Tianyun was all smiles. The skin on his face twitched, making him look like a skeleton. "Fellow Daoist, please don't be impatient. I want to exchange them for some spiritual plants, but they have to be 10,000-year-old or older." Once he said that, the expressions of all the core formation cultivators present who weren't wearing bamboo hats changed. One of the men immediately stood up and shouted, 10,000-year-old spiritual plants. "Old Tong, why don't you go die? Can you still find 5,000-year-old spiritual plants nowadays? 10,000-year-old spiritual plants?" It wasn't strange that this cultivator had such an attitude. 3,000-year-old spiritual plants were already hard to find, let alone 10,000-year-old ones. In this world, 5,000-year-old spiritual plants were most likely extinct. Tong Tianyun was still all smiles, revealing his sinister teeth. He smiled at that man and said, "It's a trade fair, after all. It's fine as long as both parties are willing. Fellow Daoist can't take them out, but that doesn't mean others can't, right?" That man couldn't refute him, so he could only let out a heavy humph and sat back down. Someone else said, "Fellow Daoist Tong, isn't your request a bit too much? What's the value of 10,000-year-old spiritual plants? Do we core formation cultivators even have a chance? I'm afraid nascent soul cultivators would have snatched them long ago." Tong Tianyun was still smiling. "Fellow Daoist, these crystal soul jades of mine are also hard to find in this world. They're not much easier to find than 10,000-year-old spiritual plants." Thus, another person fell silent. "Fellow Daoist Tong, Qin," she said faintly, "I don't have 10,000-year-old spiritual plants you want, but I can give you 100,000 spirit stones and a 5,000-year-old spiritual plant in exchange." Once he said that, not only Mo Tianga, but everyone else also looked at him. 100,000 spirit stones wasn't a small amount, even for nascent soul cultivators. Moreover, someone just said they couldn't find 5,000-year-old spiritual plants nowadays, so he took out a 5,000-year-old spiritual plant. However, he didn't cover his face and was wearing Xianqing School's Daoist robe, showing his superior cultivation level, so no one dared to doubt him. Even Tong Tianyun didn't say anything for a while. A chuckle suddenly rang out. It was the core formation cultivator with the highest cultivation level aside from Qin Shi that Mo Tianga had noticed. He said in a hoarse voice, "Xianqing School is really rich and overbearing. They can actually afford 100,000 spirit stones and a 5,000-year-old spiritual plant." Qin Shi's expression didn't change. He was still calm and composed. "If you can afford a better condition, please don't hesitate to offer it." That person admitted frankly, "I really can't afford your price. However, whether I can get crystal soul jades or not depends on whether fellow Daoist Tong agrees or not." Everyone's gaze shifted to Tong Tianyun. Tong Tianyun once again grinned at Qin Shi, revealing his ghastly teeth. "Fellow Daoist Shoujing, I'm really sorry. I only want a 10,000-year-old spiritual plant. I don't want anything else." Qin Shi's expression changed. He said helplessly, since that's the case, I have no other choice. Tong Tianyun sighed and asked again, is there any fellow Taoist who can use 10,000-year-old spiritual plants to exchange? Mo Tiange tilted her head to look at him, then sent him a voice transmission. Senior Marshal Brother Shoujing, is this crystal soul jade really so valuable? Qin Shi answered in a low voice, it's so much, so it should be worth it. However, 10,000-year-old spiritual plants are too rare. I'm afraid only a few old monsters in this world can take them out. Mo Tiange pondered for a while. When Tong Tianyun was about to give up, she suddenly said, fellow Taoist Tong, I do have a 10,000-year-old spiritual plant, but... Chapter 267. Tong Tianyun's eyes brightened. Fellow Taoist Qingwei, everyone's gaze fell on Mo Tiange. Qin Shi even frowned, looking at her with an indescribable expression. Mo Tiange looked calm and continued to say, although fellow Taoists' crystal soul jades are also very rare, they're not as rare as 10,000-year-old spiritual plants. This transaction seems a bit unfair. Tong Tianyun was delighted, but his expression soon returned to normal. He said, I spent half a lifetime collecting these crystal soul jades. Not to mention others, even nascent soul seniors wouldn't be able to take out so many crystal soul jades at once. Fellow Taoist Qingwei, please don't ask for too much. Mo Tiange was indeed asking for too much. Qin Shi already told her that so many crystal soul jades were worth exchanging with 10,000-year-old spiritual plants, but his price was only 100,000 spirit stones and a 5,000-year-old spiritual plant. 5,000-year-old spiritual plants were naturally rare in the world, but compared to 10,000-year-old spiritual plants, they were nothing. 100,000 spirit stones was certainly a sky-high price for foundation building cultivators and even ordinary core formation cultivators, but it couldn't make up for the difference in 10,000-year-old spiritual plants. Qin Shi obviously had the same idea. Most importantly, 10,000-year-old spiritual plants could only exist in inaccessible places or secret places like Demonic Mountain. No matter which cultivator accidentally obtained a 10,000-year-old spiritual plant, as long as it appeared, it would soon fall into the hands of a nascent soul cultivator. In that case, even if it had a price, it wouldn't have a market. Mo Tiange was certain that if Tong Tianyun really wanted it, he wouldn't let it go. Besides, she wasn't afraid the transaction wouldn't work. 10,000-year-old spiritual plants were nothing to her. She wanted crystal soul jades because she wanted to know whether they were really related to the art of engineering. Therefore, she just smiled. Fellow Taoist Tong, you can't say that. No matter how many crystal soul jades you have, you can always find them if you slowly collect them. 10,000-year-old spiritual plants are different. You can't collect them one leaf at a time. As soon as he said this, many of the people present revealed a smile. There were even some people who laughed out loud and then quickly quieted down. Tong Tianyun didn't speak for a while. His skinny face was expressionless. He originally thought Mo Tiange was someone who'd just formed her gold core and was still a relative novice. Even if Qin Shoujing was by her side, she still wouldn't have enough confidence. Unexpectedly, she was actually quite astute and bold. She wasn't like other female cultivators from cultivation groups who didn't understand the ways of the world. After thinking for a while, he said, fellow Taoist Qingwei, if your spiritual plants are good enough, I'm willing to exchange them with other treasures or spirit stones. However, you have to show me the quality of the spiritual plants first. No problem, Mo Tiange readily agreed, but she didn't immediately take out the spiritual plants. Of course, Tong Tianyun was also very astute. He stretched his hand to the side and made an inviting gesture. Fellow Taoist Qingwei, please come with me. His gaze flickered, then he said, fellow Taoist Shoujing, why don't you be our witness? This was Kuanzhong City, after all, and Mo Tiange had a unique treasure on her. If she was alone with him and something happened to her, he wouldn't be able to bear the responsibility. Ever since Master Daoist Qingwei successfully advanced to the core formation realm, her name had already spread to this side. Who didn't know she was Lord Daoist Jinghe's beloved disciple? With the protection of a middle-stage nascent soul cultivator, not to mention him, even the entire Kuanzhong city couldn't afford to offend her. Qin Shi naturally understood. He was indeed a bit worried, so he also smiled and didn't refuse. He also stood up and leisurely followed them into a small door. This was only a small warehouse with half of the goods piled up. A table was placed at the door. Fellow Daoist Qingwei, Tong Tianyun complained as soon as they entered the warehouse, "If I knew you had them, why would I bring them to the trade fair? Alas, showing off your wealth isn't a good thing." Mo Tiange smiled. "I also didn't know fellow Daoist Tong would need them." What a coincidence. The two of them spoke intimately, but in fact, they were just exchanging pleasantries. Once she finished speaking, Mo Tiange took out a jade box from her Qiankuan bag. She knew once the 1,000-year-old chalcedony and Qian stone appeared, their prices would be sky-high. She was afraid she didn't have enough spirit stones, so she took some spiritual plants from her virtual sky world. She originally didn't plan to use spiritual plants older than 3,000 years, but after thinking about it, she still brought one with her. She didn't expect to have a use for it. As soon as the jade box was taken out, the spiritual aura couldn't be suppressed. Both Qin Shi and Tong Tianyun stared at the jade box. Tong Tianyun took the jade box and tore off the talisman on it. As soon as he opened it, a strong medicinal fragrance rushed towards him. His eyes widened and he couldn't breathe for a long time. After a long time, he finally exhaled slowly. It should be right. It's a 10,000-year-old drunken orchid. He lifted the jade box and sniffed the fragrance. He carefully distinguished the smell and the roots and began to identify the medicinal properties with great proficiency. The rhizome is intact, and the medicinal properties are well preserved. Drunken orchid isn't a very rare spiritual plant, but this one must have grown in a place with extremely rich spiritual aura for 10,000 years. It's indeed better than the rare spiritual plants that grow in places with ordinary spiritual aura. Tong Tianyun moved his gaze away from the drunken orchid with difficulty. He closed the jade box and stuck the talisman on it again. He then looked up at Mo Tiange. "Fellow Daoist Qingwei, these crystal-souled jades are yours. In addition, I have some unique materials here. They aren't very valuable, but they're rare. Consider them my thanks to you. What do you think?" Mo Tiange looked down at the bag Tong Tianyun handed her. It was sturdy and contained a lot of things. She gently pushed the bag back. Tong Tianyun's expression changed and became a bit unsightly. "Fellow Daoist, you." He thought Mo Tiange was dissatisfied with the price he offered. He said the materials in the bag weren't valuable because he was being modest. As one of the managers of the individual cultivator alliances in Kuanzhong City, he'd been in Kuanzhong City for many years and collected countless strange materials. Normally, he wouldn't yield even if people begged him with 10,000 spirit stones. Tong Tianyun took a deep breath and said, "Fellow Daoist Qingwei, name your price. I'll compensate you with spirit stones." Mo Tiange smiled and shook her head. "Fellow Daoist Tong, please don't misunderstand. I don't want your spirit stones or materials. Fellow Daoist can use those crystal-souled jades to exchange with me. I just want you to promise me one thing." Tong Tianyun was stunned. He didn't expect she would say that. "What is it?" As a member of the Individual Cultivator Alliance in Kuanzhong City, fellow Daoist Tong must be very well informed about transactions. I happen to be looking for the whereabouts of two kinds of materials, so I hope fellow Daoist Tong can help me inquire about them. Upon hearing this request, a smile appeared on Tong Tianyun's face and he regained his previous amiable attitude. Fellow Daoist Qingwei, what are you talking about? For the sake of fellow Daoist Shoujing, what's wrong with inquiring about the whereabouts of a few materials? You really have to play this kind of joke with me. Mo Tiange smiled. It's my fault. After the two of them finished exchanging the materials, Tong Tianyun asked with concern, fellow Daoist Qingwei, what are you looking for? Tell me, maybe I'll know now. Then I won't be polite, Mo Tiange said. I'm looking for two kinds of things. One of them is a chalcedony that's more than 1,000 years old, the older, the better. The other kind is a Qiyun stone. I don't have any requirements for it. Fellow Daoist Tong, if you have any information about these two things, please tell me. This. Upon hearing what she said, hesitation flitted across Tong Tianyun's face. He looked at Mo Tiange then at Qin Shi, who had been leaning against the door and didn't interrupt their conversation. He said, to be honest, I haven't seen a Qiyun stone for many years. As for that 1,000-year-old chalcedony, I saw it once a few days ago, but it was already bought by someone. Oh. Mo Tiange was delighted. May I know who the buyer is? Fellow Daoist Tong, do you know? Tong Tianyun shook his head apologetically. Fellow Daoist Qingwei, according to the rules of Kuanzhong City, if the buyer has a request, we absolutely can't divulge the buyer's information. I can't answer this question. Mo Tiange was a bit disappointed. Right after that, she heard Tong Tianyun say, however, fellow Daoist, you've done this old man a big favor. I happen to know the buyer, so I can ask him on your behalf. Mo Tiange originally thought she had no chance, but she didn't expect there would be a turn of events. She said, if that's the case, I'll have to trouble fellow Daoist Tong. Fellow Daoist Tong, you can tell your friend that if he doesn't want to buy it with spirit stones, he can also exchange it with spiritual objects. Tong Tianyun's eyes brightened. Even spiritual plants. Mo Tiange shook her head. Fellow Daoist Tong, 10,000-year-old spiritual plants can only be encountered by luck, not sought. I only have this one. Even if I had 1,000-year-old spiritual plant, presumably your friend wouldn't care, right? Wealthy core formation cultivators like them indeed didn't care about ordinary 1,000-year-old spiritual plants. Tong Tianyun couldn't help but feel disappointed, but he soon felt relieved. 10,000-year-old spiritual plants naturally couldn't be found everywhere. Being able to find one was already extremely lucky. Alright, before we leave, I'll definitely give fellow Daoist an answer. In that case, thank you, fellow Daoist Tong. After the exchange was completed, the three of them returned to the small hall and sat down. Tong Tianyun said, I've finished my exchange with fellow Daoist Qingwei. Is there any other fellow Daoist who wants to exchange? Although everyone in the hall was curious about what they wanted to exchange, Tong Tianyun made it clear he wouldn't say anything, so they could only suppress their curiosity. After a while, another core formation cultivator spoke up. He wanted to use a Grand Valiant stone to exchange for a high-grade medicinal pill like the Clear Sky pill. Normally, this exchange would have been very attractive. Grand Valiant stones were a rare kind of wondrous stone used to cultivate swords. Unfortunately, because this trade fair was shaken by crystals, sold jades and 10,000-year-old spiritual plants from the very beginning, it seemed very unattractive. Before long, the trade fair ended hastily. During the whole process, many people were absent-minded. Their gazes kept sweeping over the wizened, expressionless Tong Tianyun, or Mo Tiange, who had her eyes drooped as if she was meditating. In the end, Mo Tiange and Qin Shi didn't fancy anything else. Qin Shi, on the other hand, took out a bottle of rare high-grade medicinal pills and said he wanted to buy the news of a 1,000-year-old chalcedony and a Qian stone. Sure enough, no one knew about it. Soon after, the trade fair ended. Everyone went out from the original entrance. There were several entrances to this trade fair. The one Mo Tiange and Qin Shi came in from was public, and there were several other secret entrances for people who didn't want their identities exposed. By the time they returned to the main street, it was already late at night. The two of them were bold and skilled. They didn't hide themselves and just slowly walked towards the small courtyard they were temporarily staying in. The people who came out had already scattered everywhere. In the end, only the two of them were left. The cool and refreshing night breeze blew. On the ground, their clothes fluttered, entangling with each other. Qin Shi suddenly stopped. He grabbed Mo Tiange's wrist and pulled her. In an instant, the two of them flashed several dozen feet away. Qin Shi's line of sight shifted. He coldly stared at a spot in the darkness and said in a heavy voice, "Your Excellency, you've concealed your breath and followed us. What's your intention in the end?" Chapter 268. Mo Tiange focused her gaze and saw a flash of light where they were standing. The bluestone slabs on the ground were all cut, leaving behind a faintly discernible spiritual aura. She was secretly shocked. Her divine sense was always paying attention to the surroundings, but she only sensed the spiritual aura of the moment it appeared. If Qin Shi wasn't by her side, she might have been able to escape, but it would have been a lot more dangerous. Core formation cultivators really couldn't be underestimated. Qin Shi finished speaking, and the cultivator's aura finally appeared in their divine sense without any concealment. It was very restrained, but it hid its sharpness deeply. Mo Tiange secretly held the white silk handkerchief in her hand and the square seal magic weapon Lord Daoist Jinghe gave her with her other hand. With the white silk handkerchief in hand, even if this person attacked her, she would be able to resist and then wait for an opportunity to fight back. That person finally came out. It was the late-stage core formation cultivator whose cultivation level was second only to Qin Shi, who sat across from them at the trade fair. Qin Shi pushed her back and sent a private message, "Be careful." Although they were both in the core formation realm, there was a huge difference in strength between early-stage and late-stage core formation cultivators. Mo Tiange knew she hadn't even refined her natal magic weapon and didn't have the ability to show off, so she didn't say much and quietly retreated. That person said in a hoarse voice, "The two of you are really bold. You took out such treasures at the trade fair and actually dared to walk on the street without concealment. Aren't you afraid of being robbed?" Qin Shi sneered and stared at that person. "Robbed? You think you can?" Mo Tiange wrinkled her brows. She always felt that the Qin Shi outside was completely different from the Qin Shi inside the school, who was quiet and only cared about closed-door cultivation. The latter person had a slight shadow of the former senior martial brother Qin, but the former didn't look like him at all. "You're very confident." That person's face under the bamboo hat was hidden in the darkness, but his voice was full of interest. "Everyone says that although Qin Shoujing's talent is ordinary, he's far better than geniuses with single spiritual roots on the road of cultivation. I'm a bit unconvinced." "What does it have to do with me whether you're convinced or not?" Qin Shi's expression remained unchanged. "If you want to fight, please. Otherwise, don't waste our time." That person moved his head and said with a smile, "Fight? Here." When all was said and done, Kuanzhong City was a city with a lot of mortals and most of the cultivators were low-level cultivators. If two core formation cultivators fought, it would definitely be a disaster. A slightly mocking smile appeared on Qin Shi's face. "Your Excellency, didn't you already make your move? Could it be that you've recalled the rule of Kuanzhong City forbidding fights in the city?" "Rules?" The man let out a low, hoarse laugh. Kuinjong City only has a few core formation individual cultivators. Even if they don't comply, what can they do? These words were really arrogant. There weren't just 1 or 2 individual cultivators in Kuinjong City, but 7 of them. This person disregarded the rules of Kuinjong City like this. Could it be that he could fight 1 against 7? Besides, she'd seen Tong Tianyun's divine sense and Daoist Kumu's means. Since Qin Shi could see through them, they must be extremely powerful. Could it be that this person's vision was even higher than Qin Shi's? Taking a step back, between her and Qin Shi, one was in the early stage of the core formation realm, while the other was in the peak stage of the core formation realm. Qin Shi was only in the late stage of the core formation realm, so how could he possibly fight 1 against 2? That was what Mo Tiange was thinking, but in the next moment, she suddenly saw a flash of sword light. That black-robed cultivator had made his move. Qin Shi had long anticipated this. He raised his left hand, and a golden light sprang from his arm. The 3-yang real fire sword appeared in the golden light. He flipped his hand, and the 3-yang real fire sword soared high into the sky, forming a wall of fire that completely blocked that black-robed cultivator's sword aura. Seeing that Qin Shi easily blocked his sword aura, the black-robed cultivator tilted his head with a strange expression on his face. He was about to say something, but Qin Shi didn't give him the chance. He gathered extremely pure flame-colored spiritual aura in his right hand and pushed it lightly. The 3-yang real fire sword burst out with dazzling light and pounced on that person. In a hurry, the black-robed cultivator put his palms together and unsheathed the long sword on his back. The sword aura was extremely sharp and scattered sword light. This person was obviously a sword cultivator without a doubt. With such momentum, if he wasn't a sword cultivator, how could he have such a sharp sword aura? Tiange. Qin Shi suddenly turned his head and shouted. Sword aura had no eyes, so Mo Tiange knew what he meant. In an instant, she waved the white silk handkerchief, turning it into a mist that enveloped her. The mist was hazy, and no spiritual aura could be seen. The sword aura was sharp, but it disappeared without a trace when it encountered the mist. The fact that even she could block his sword aura so easily startled the black-robed cultivator. Before he could withdraw his sword, Qin Shi's sword had already arrived. He hastily pulled his sword back to block it. With a muffled sound, the sword aura and spiritual aura between the 2 swords collided and exploded with a loud bang. A fight of magical power between 2 core formation cultivators who were both very good at destructive means. How terrifying was the spiritual aura pressure produced. In an instant, the street was already in a mess. The bluestone slabs were broken inch by inch, and the street was beyond recognition. If the street wasn't wide, the shops on both sides probably wouldn't have been able to escape this disaster. As soon as the spiritual aura exploded, several flight lights flew out from the tallest tower in Kuinjong City, flying in their direction. Qin Shi and Mo Tiange didn't move, and neither did the black-robed cultivator. Kuinjong City wasn't big, so the flight lights arrived in a flash. They were 3 core formation cultivators, and the leader was Tong Tianyun. Fellow Taoists, you. Tong Tianyun was surprised to see them. Qin Shi glanced at Tong Tianyun, then raised his hand to withdraw his 3-yang real fire sword. He said, Fellow Daoist Tong, you came at the right time. This person has been following us since we came out of the trade fair, and he even launched a sneak attack on us. I don't know what his intentions are. Tong Tianyun was even more surprised. He stared at the black-robed cultivator. You, although he only said one word, Mo Tiange had a bad premonition. Judging from Tong Tianyun's expression, he seemed to know this person. When the black-robed cultivator saw Tong Tianyun and the others coming, he laughed and took off his bamboo hat. He had a very young face, equivalent to a young man of 24 or 25 years old. He was clean and elegant, not as good as Qin Shi, but the tips of his eyebrows and the corners of his eyes carried the color of spring. His face was like a peach blossom, and as his eyes moved, he seemed to be full of affection. When Qin Shi saw this face, he immediately frowned and said in a muffled voice, "It's you." The youth smiled. "Isn't it me?" His smile made Qin Shi even more unhappy. "Since you're here, why didn't you come to see us directly? Why did you sneak attack us?" The youth waved his hand and put his sword back into its sheath. He then fanned himself with the bamboo hat in his hand and said frivolously, "It's because of you." His eyes flashed. He stared at Imotienge with his watery eyes and smiled. "Miss, are you Lord Daoist Jinghe's last disciple, Master Daoist Qingwei?" "I'm Jing Xingji, a cultivator from Gujin sect. I've heard a lot about you." Jing Xingji. A cultivator from Gujin sect. Qin Shi said they were waiting for a cultivator from Gujin sect here. Could it be this person? She saluted him and said faintly, "I'm Mo Qingwei. Greetings to fellow Daoist Jing." Jing Xingji was stunned to see that she wasn't moved in the slightest by his attentive attitude. He then smiled even more brilliantly. "So it's Miss Mo. When I first heard Miss Mo formed her gold core at such a young age and was called a genius among geniuses, I thought people were exaggerating. Now that I've met you, Miss Jing Xingji." Qin Shi bluntly called his name and showed his displeasure on his face. "Fellow Daoist Tong and the others are still here. Why are you fawning over my junior martial sister without an explanation?" Jing Xingji's smile became even more cheerful. He blinked his peach blossom eyes and said, "Qin Shoujing, why are you in such a hurry? Fellow Daoist Tong doesn't have any objections. You're wasting our time." Qin Shi glared at him coldly, then turned to Tong Tianyun and the other two. He cupped his hands and said, "Fellow Daoist Tong, I've already explained the situation. If you want to kill or punish us, you should ask fellow Daoist Jing. Junior martial sister and I will take our leave first." He then turned around and left, looking as if he didn't want to stay even a second longer. Mo Tiange didn't have time to say anything. She nodded at Tong Tianyun then hurriedly followed him. Tong Tianyun didn't stop them. Although they had a fight of magical powers in the city and many things were damaged, it didn't seem like there were any casualties, so it wasn't a serious incident. However, when he turned around, he saw Jing Xingji staring in the direction the two of them left with a faint smile on his face. Tong Tianyun couldn't help but remind him with a smile, "Fellow Daoist Jing, I have to advise you that fellow Daoist Shoujing isn't in a good mood this time. It's best not to provoke him." "Oh." Qin Shi and Mo Tiange's silhouettes disappeared. Jing Xingji's gaze shifted and he asked with a smile, "Why is that? Isn't Qin Shoujing unmoved by anything? Why is he in a bad mood?" Tong Tianyun said, "No matter who he is, he must be in a bad mood after failing to form his nascent soul 3 times, right?" Jing Xingji nodded, but then he blinked again. "You're right, but I think there's another reason why he's in a bad mood, right?" Hee hee. Tong Tianyun pretended not to understand his gaze and said, "I don't know about this. If fellow Daoist Jing wants to know, why don't you ask fellow Daoist Shoujing?" Jing Xingji shook his head. "I'm not stupid. Can I ask him? If I ask a few more questions, his 3-yang real fire sword will come to cut me. Could it be that fellow Daoist Jing is afraid?" Tong Tianyun was obviously trying to provoke him, but Jing Xingji was also frank. He shrugged and said, "Fellow Daoist Tong, don't provoke me. I admit that in terms of fights of magical powers, although I'm a sword cultivator, I'm not as good as him. However, maybe I really can surpass him in the matter of forming my nascent soul." Tong Tianyun's gaze flickered. Fellow Daoist Jing, you're really confident. Could it be that you already have hope in forming your nascent soul? What are you talking about? Jing Xingji wasn't stupid. Once he saw Tong Tianyun's expression, he immediately pushed the blame away. Didn't Qin Shoujing fail to form his nascent soul 3 times? Presumably, he won't be able to form his nascent soul in a short time. If I work harder and succeed in forming my nascent soul in 1 try, won't I be able to surpass him? Hee hee. Tong Tianyun chuckled and said, "It seems fellow Daoist Jing is very confident in this trip to Demonic Mountain." "I can't say I'm confident, I just made a few extra preparations." Jing Xingji looked at Tong Tianyun and said meaningfully, "Isn't fellow Daoist Tong the same?" Presumably, fellow Daoist Tong has a well-thought-out plan for this trip to Demonic Mountain. Tong Tianyun pretended not to understand what Jing Xingji said and changed the subject. "Fellow Daoist Jing, since you're here, let's meet up tomorrow. We've already been delayed for a while. If the restrictions on Demonic Mountain disappear early, we'll suffer a huge loss." Right. Jing Xingji was all smiles. "Since that's the case, I'll go back and rest first. Fellow Daoist Tong, see you tomorrow." "Hey!" Tong Tianyun stopped him. He was also all smiles. "Fellow Daoist Jing, you disregarded our Kuanzhong city's rules and fought in the city, causing trouble and breaking things. Shouldn't you pay for it?" Chapter 269. Qin Shi was in a very bad mood. Upon realizing this, Mo Tiange returned to the courtyard she was temporarily staying in and was about to return to her room. Unexpectedly, Qin Shi said from behind her, "Wait." His tone right now couldn't be considered good, but he obviously suppressed his emotions, so Mo Tiange stopped and said with a calm attitude, "Senior Marshal Brother Shoujing, is there anything else?" Qin Shi hesitated for a moment before he said, "Regarding today's matter, I still have to tell you." Startled, Mo Tiange asked, "Senior Marshal Brother, could it be that you think it's a bit inappropriate for me to take out treasures like this?" Qin Shi shook his head. "We're not individual cultivators without any foundation. We have a school and a master to back us up, so taking out some treasures once in a while isn't a big deal. On the contrary, it would only make people feel that our Xianqing school isn't to be trifled with. Then, is there anything else?" Qin Shi's probing gaze swept over her face. He asked, "A 10,000-year-old spiritual plant, could it be a gift from your ancestor?" "Correct." Mo Tiange had long thought about how to answer this question, so her answer was very straightforward. Qin Shi nodded. This was the only answer he could think of. "Is this what Senior Brother wants to say?" "Of course not," Qin Shi said. "What I want to talk to you about is Jing Xingji." "Oh. What's the problem with fellow Daoist Jing?" Qin Shi hesitated for a moment then said, "I've known this person since I formed my gold core. He was the disciple of Venerable Swordsman Zhongguang of Gujin sect. However, Venerable Swordsman Zhongguang already passed away 100 years ago, so the status of his disciples in Gujin sect is quite awkward. Because this Jing Xingji was treated unfairly in the sect, his temperament is quite strange. He loves to provoke female cultivators, but in fact, he doesn't want to take responsibility. You, Senior Marshal Brother Shoujing, are you worried I'll be bewitched by this person?" Before he could finish, Mo Tiange interrupted him and said bluntly. She said the word confused so bluntly, causing Qin Shi's face to slightly redden. He turned his head away somewhat uncomfortably. "I was just reminding you." The corners of Mo Tiange's mouth twitched. She finally smiled and said, "Thank you for your kind advice, Senior Marshal Brother. Can I go back and rest now?" With an awkward expression, Qin Shi nodded. Mo Tiange then turned around and went back into the house. Once she returned to her room, Mo Tiange sat down and rubbed the space between her eyebrows. She admitted that she was a little unhappy just now. How could she be such a shallow person? No matter how beautiful Jing Xingji was, or how sweet his tongue was, it was none of her business. But Qin Shi's advice was, after all, because he cared about her, so she calmed down after thinking about it. In fact, when they met again 35 years later, she still couldn't figure out what Qin Shi was thinking. She knew from a cultivator's point of view, Qin Shi treated her extremely well. When she was injured in the 10,000 laws of nature formation, he went out to look for medicine for her. On the trip to Demonic Mountain, her cultivation level was obviously low, but he was still willing to take her along. She did not know if this was the affection of her senior martial brother Qin, who had gone through thick and thin with her, or the care of her father's friend, immortal Shou Jing, for the younger generation. However, it was one thing to feel sentimental. Logically, she did not want to spend too much time with senior brother Shou Jing. Or perhaps she had been too competitive all her life. When she was young, she was better educated than Tianjun and the other boys. Later on, she always wanted to cultivate to become an immortal, and was unwilling to indulge in cultivation just because she was a female cultivator. Later on, she finally made a name for herself. She had talents and a master. But at that time, she was even more unwilling to indulge herself. She wholeheartedly regarded those genius cultivators as her goal. Now, it wasn't that she didn't have any regrets in her heart. If it had always been that senior martial brother Qin, maybe she would have spoken her heart and asked for a future for herself. But, he wasn't only senior martial brother Qin, but he was also immortal Shou Jing. She was unwilling to look up to a person like this and become a little woman under his protection. Besides, she also couldn't understand his thoughts. He was a person with a firm Dao heart, so he most likely never thought about dual cultivation. If she let go of her feelings too much and ended up like Wei Jiaxi or Wan Mingzhu, what would she do? She admitted she was timid and didn't dare to pursue it as persistently as them because her final goal was still to achieve the great Tao. She was unwilling to give up for anything. So, let it be. However, ever since they left the mountain, this senior martial brother Shou Jing's attitude towards her, although he still took care of her in every aspect, was clearly resentful. She was puzzled. What was he resentful about? Was it because he went out to look for medicine and got seriously injured? With his mental state and cultivation level, he shouldn't be like this. Since she couldn't understand things, she simply put them at the back of her mind. Mo Tiange disguised herself outside, then entered the virtual sky world. She put the crystal souled jade she got from the trade fair in the virtual sky world first and kept the 2 stone sculpture puppets by her side. Although the cultivation levels of these 2 puppets were only in the late stage of the foundation building realm, they were very strong and might come in handy. Then there were the 2 spiritual beasts, Xiaohua and Feifei. These days, she had been raising them in the virtual sky world. The 2 spiritual beasts accompanied each other, sometimes fighting and sometimes playing. They had a very good relationship. Moreover, when she was in closed-door meditation to form her gold core, she also made them cultivate seriously. Xiaohua was now in the peak of the 4th rank and was about to break through to the 5th rank. Feifei was a bit behind and had just reached the 4th rank. Spiritual beasts' realm breakthroughs weren't as troublesome as human cultivators. They didn't need to cultivate their mental state and didn't need to go through inner demons, so it was much simpler. Mo Tiange herself didn't have much use for the spiritual plants in the virtual sky world, so she always let them eat them whenever they wanted. In this virtual sky world, Xiaohua and Feifei had endless spiritual plants and rich spiritual aura, so their cultivation speed was many times faster than other spiritual beasts. Feifei didn't have any offensive skills, so it couldn't advance to the 5th rank for a while. Ever since Mo Tiange discovered Xiaohua's fire spells were very powerful and could definitely become a fighting spiritual beast, she deliberately cultivated it. Not only did she let it eat the spiritual plants in the virtual sky world, but she also specially concocted constitution-enhancing pills for it to advance. Just as she was about to go to the other bamboo room she used as a spiritual beast room to see how the two spiritual beasts were doing, she saw Feifei running in from the outside, throwing itself at her and grabbing her hem. Mo Tiange bent down, picked Feifei up and patted its head. "What's wrong? Did you cultivate properly?" Feifei whimpered twice and tugged at her clothes, trying to pull her out. Mo Tiange was confused. "What's the matter?" Feifei shook its head as if it was nodding, but it kept looking in the direction of the spiritual beast room. Mo Tiange frowned and walked towards the spiritual beast room with Feifei in her arms. Xiaohua was in the middle of a realm breakthrough. Did something happen? Judging from the spiritual aura fluctuation, there was nothing unusual. When she arrived outside the spiritual beast room and pushed the door open, she saw Xiaohua nestled in the corner, curled up and cultivating. Its eyes were closed, and its body was covered in a fiery red spiritual aura, dyeing the whole room blood red. Feifei barked again, but it didn't dare to disturb Xiaohua. It just circled around it twice then ran back to grab her hem. Mo Tiange carefully sensed it then smiled and lowered her body to stroke Feifei's head. "Don't worry, Xiaohua's about to advance. Let's not disturb it." Feifei seemed to be a bit confused, but seeing that she was comforting it, it obediently followed her out and returned to the main room. The red light on Xiaohua's body was its fire spiritual aura. With such strong fire spiritual aura, it was obvious that it had successfully advanced and was now in the stage of stabilizing its realm. Mo Tiange was delighted. If Xiaohua could successfully advance to the 5th rank, with its unique sun real fire, it would definitely be able to help her. In that case, she would also have one more means to protect herself. In the next few days, Mo Tiange even refused to meet with her companions and focused on guarding the virtual sky world, waiting for Xiaohua to finish its advancement. The advancement of spiritual beasts was much easier than that of human cultivators. Xiaohua's advancement was already successful. As long as its spiritual aura was stable, it would be a 5th rank spiritual beast. 5 days later, before they left, Xiaohua finally finished its advancement and came out of the spiritual beast room. At that time, Qin Shi also told her it was time to leave for Demonic Mountain. Mo Tiange left Feifei in the virtual sky world and took Xiaohua out. She then packed up all her things and went to see Qin Shi. Qin Shi was in the hall. Although he was holding a teacup, he didn't move. His gaze fell on the void, and no one knew what he was thinking. His divine sense sensed her coming in, so he turned his head and his gaze fell on Xiaohua. A look of surprise flashed across his face. "Xiaohua, advanced?" Mo Tiange nodded. "I advanced not long ago." "Oh." Qin Shi looked at Xiaohua with a strange expression. During the more than 20 years she wasn't in Xianqing school, Xiaohua followed Yizhenji, and Yizhenji lived in his immortal's cave. In those more than 20 years, Xiaohua started to have medicinal pills concocted by her. Later, when those medicinal pills ran out, he wasn't stingy and never stopped giving medicinal pills to Xiaohua just like before. Kunwu cultivators never raised spiritual beasts so extravagantly. Even nascent soul cultivators rarely treated spiritual beasts this generously. Moreover, spiritual beasts worthy of such treatment were all rare breeds. If other people knew that the inferno beasts, which could be found everywhere in Kunwu, were raised like this, they would probably want to dig out all the medicinal pills Xiaohua ate. Xiaohua was also strange. Many low-level cultivators also raised inferno beasts, but none of them had mutated like Xiaohua. Now, what change she found even more strange was that in the more than 20 years Xiaohua ate medicinal pills all the time, it only advanced from the second rank to the third rank. Now, in the same amount of time, Xiaohua unexpectedly advanced to the fifth rank. Qin Shi also had spiritual beasts, but he rarely used them to fight. Nevertheless, he knew how difficult it was to raise spiritual beasts. He had a Chongming bird that he raised for more than 100 years, but it was only in the fifth rank now. Although he didn't raise it as much as Xiaohua, he still fed it with medicinal pills. Nevertheless, Xiaohua advanced to the fifth rank in such a short period of time. His intuition told him something was wrong. Suspicions arose in his heart, but when he thought about it carefully, he found even more doubts. Master said Tinga's pill concocting skills were very good. Just like that time when he saw Xinji feeding Xiaohua medicinal pills, they were refined to perfection. But what was even more astonishing was that those medicinal pills were actually made from thousand-year-old spiritual plants. Even if she received many spiritual plants from a deification cultivator 60 years ago, she shouldn't be this extravagant, right? Her pill concocting skills must be the result of concocting many medicinal pills, but where did she get those medicinal plants? His pill concocting skills were the best in all of Clear Spring Peak. Master saw that he had a talent for pill concocting, so he deliberately trained him. Usually, whenever there were spiritual plants, they were always sent to him. What about her? Where did she get so many spiritual plants to practice? Moreover, she seemed to rarely ask the steward's hall to collect spiritual plants. Mo Tiange was scared by his gaze. She couldn't help but ask, "Senior Marshal Brother Shoujing, aren't we leaving?" Oh. Qin Shi regained his train of thought and stood up. Then let's go. Watching him walk out of the small courtyard, Mo Tiange was full of questions. She put Xiaohua back into her spiritual beast bag and followed him out. You're tuning into the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.